behalf of the United States and the toll that it takes on one. Just back from an overseas trip, having testified in the House of Representatives today, Ranking Member Reid and I both decided that we'd like to put our opening comments in for the record to spare you the time and exhaustion. And if you'd like to do the same, Secretary, we'd welcome that in.
Have you put in the record, sir?
Okay, we will do that and proceed. I would like to start with the first round of questions, Mr. Secretary, and then I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Reid. Just 1 second here. I know you're really glad that we didn't go through all of our opening sentences. Mr. Secretary, the Senate is currently considering the Genius Act. You're familiar with that legislation that's designed to promote and regulate innovation in payment stablecoins. The bill aims to bring our payment system into the 21st century. Unlike slow and costly wire transfers, stablecoins enable direct peer-to-peer transactions that settle nearly instantaneously. The potential benefits are immense. These digital assets can remove friction in global payments. They can unlock working capital for more productive deployment and improve settlement and efficiency in financial markets. The adoption of these innovative digital assets is soaring, growing from around $45 billion in early 2020, around $4 billion in early 2020, to more than $200 billion today. If Congress can provide long-due regulatory clarity, this remarkable growth trajectory will only accelerate. So my first question, Secretary Bessent, my legislation requires that stablecoins be backed by cash or short-dated U.S. Treasuries. One investment bank estimates that the Genius Act would expand the stablecoin market from its current value of $240 billion to $2 trillion by the end of 2028, with most of the reserves likely to be held in U.S. Treasuries. What are the benefits of having a new and expansive source of demand for U.S. Treasuries in the years ahead?
Senator, thank you for your leadership on this important matter. As you know, the administration, led by President Trump, has made the digital assets a priority, and making the U.S. the world leader in digital assets is essential for our goals. Your question is a very important one. In the history of the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, there have been the numerous passages along the way where many people assumed that the U.S. dollar would lose reserve currency status, and there's always been a new mechanism that has cemented that. This administration is committed to keeping the reserve currency status and enhancing that, and I believe that stablecoin legislation backed by U.S. Treasuries, or T-bills, will create a market that will expand U.S. dollar usage via these stablecoins all around the world. And I think that $2 trillion is a very reasonable number, and I could see it greatly exceeding that.
You've previously spoken about the need to reverse some of the overregulation in capital standards, including a reduction in the supplementary leverage ratio. That ratio penalizes banks, or the level of it today penalizes banks by requiring them to hold excess capital against low-risk assets like treasuries and reserves. So my question, Secretary Bessent, is how soon could we see changes to the SLR ratio, and how could yields be affected by a more tailored approach to capital requirements for risk-free assets?
Well, Senator, risk assets are like cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. That some risk assets are riskier than others, and the problem with the SLR is it doesn't differentiate.
Yeah.
So we have been working via FSOC and the regulators, OCC, the FDIC, and the Fed, to coordinate a change in the supplementary leverage ratio for the purchase of treasuries. We don't know the exact magnitude in terms of how it might affect yields, but what we have seen in the past is that when this requirement was removed, it had a substantial effect. So we don't know the effect. We do know the direction of travel. We don't know the magnitude.
Got it. I do think that a tapering approach, I'm pleased to hear it, will have a very positive impact on the markets. Thank you for that. And I know this has been top of mind and front of mind for you, certainly in recent days. You've been playing an incredible role in negotiating terms of trade for our nation with other nations. You're just returned from a big trip in that regard. And to the extent you could comment in a public arena on what sort of update you might be able to give us on trade and tariffs, I think we'd be very interested to hear that.
Yes. So as I've said several times before, there are 18 important trading relationships. They constitute between 90 and 95% of our trade deficits also. So our largest trading partners, but definitionally are also some of the worst offenders in terms of trade deficits. We are finding that these trading partners have come to us with many of them with robust proposals. Some have been a little slower to come, like the European Union, but have now shown better faith. The administration put a 90-day hold on the reciprocal tariffs and took everyone down to a global baseline of 10%. It is my belief that countries that are negotiating in good faith could be rolled forward. Our negotiations with the Chinese were extensive, deliberative, done with respect between the two countries, but also the understanding on my part that China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the world, and that at 30% of global manufacturing, this is not sustainable. So we are looking to insert fairness into our relationship with the Chinese, and that can be done via them exporting less to us, or it could be done with what I would, to paraphrase from Ray Dalio, a big, beautiful rebalancing, where President Trump would like to rebalance the U.S. more in favor of manufacturing. We're down to about 9% of the U.S. workforce is involved in manufacturing. The Chinese economy is imbalanced on the manufacturing side. They need to increase domestic consumption substantially. Yep. So if we could do that together, then the two largest economies in the world could get into better equilibrium that's fairer for the American people.
Thank you very much for that thoughtful response. Now I'd like to turn to my ranking member and partner, Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome home, Mr. Secretary.
Senator Reid, nice to meet you. I don't believe we've ever met.
Well, today's the beginning of a beautiful relationship. Didn't Humphrey Bogart say that?
We can quote Ray Dalio, big, beautiful.
Mr. Secretary, Treasury distributes about $5.4 trillion a year in payments, Social Security benefits, tax refunds, military salaries, and all these payment systems contain some of the most personal information of every American. And you have had in Treasury DOGE representatives who are reputed to have access to lots of information. And I've been asking questions, not just of you, but of other cabinet members about the extent of the information they have. Have your staff or any DOGE representatives in terms of the distribution of payments started to stop or block any payments?
Not to my knowledge.
Well, it turns out that in emails filed by the Treasury Department to court, your chief of staff emailed that, quote, Mr. Krause and his team needed access to the federal payment system so they could pause USAID payments and comply with Mr. Trump's January 20th executive order to halt foreign aid. Did that take place?
I believe that may have been before I arrived on January 28th. And I also believe, if that's a Washington Post story or the New York Times story, they were actually quite selective with the email that was leaked to them. And Senator, just to be clear, what I discovered on my arrival was that we process about 1.5 billion payments a year that sums to the total you mentioned. Approximately 1/3 of that do not have what is known as a TAS, Treasury Accounting Symbol, or we found that. Having a TAS is the only way to tie a payment back to an appropriation. So we have been working very hard to make sure that all 1.5 billion payments can be tied back to an appropriation. I think a good mental model for this is to think of what's called the Treasury General Account, the TGA, is the checking account for the U.S. government. And above that sits between 400 and 450 entities, whether it's the big departments, the agencies, the smaller entities, and they put in requests for payments. Treasury is just the paymaster. So in general, we do not try to stop payments if they are properly notified, authorized.
Well, you're right. The occurrence of this stoppage was January 24th, 4 days. But in fact, payment was stopped because of a political motivation. USAID was deemed to be an inappropriate agency in the government, and which begs the question, how could you stop someone, or could you stop someone that decided to stop payments to an individual organization for reasons that were not meritorious at all? Is that...
I'm not familiar with the litigation around that, but I can tell you since January 28th, none of that has happened, and that everyone, I think there's some conflation, and much of it's due to the media on what is a DOJ employee, what is a Treasury employee. Anyone who works in the Treasury building is a Treasury employee. So they may have come there at the suggestion of DOJ, but they are properly trained and compliant just as any other Treasury employee would be.
Well, I think you've touched on an issue of conflation of different jobs. On February 3rd, you wrote in response to my letter that one of your colleagues, Tom Krause, started as a DOJ representative, but then was brought on as an expert/consultant. But then 2 days later, on February 5th, you installed him as the Fiscal Assistant Secretary, which is the top official charge of running the Bureau of Fiscal Services. At any time during his employment at Treasury, was he a member or an employee of another company?
He may have been, if he were an SGE, I think he's allowed to have outside employment.
Well, in fact, again, another transcript from a court case, he was an employment, he was the chief executive officer of Cloud Software Group, which presents interesting or potential conflicts of interest.
But, Senator, I believe as an SGE that is permitted to be seconded for a limited period of time with proper controls.
Is he still involved with cloud computing?
I believe he's left Treasury.
So let me just switch to another area of data. I'm very much concerned because of the DOJ penetration of the entire government. Again, the IRS has extraordinarily confidential, deeply personal taxpayer information, Social Security numbers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if compromised, this could threaten Americans' financial security, as well as even more sinister aspects. DOJ staff members have attempted to access the integrated data retrieval system at the IRS. Secretary, does DOJ staff have they ever had, or do they have access to the integrated data retrieval system?
Not to my knowledge, sir. Again, any information they would have had access to would have been via, and I'm new to this, but I'm going to throw a lot of acronyms at you. It would have been through an MOU between IRS and OMB. So we put the proper controls, prophylactics around any activities that they had in the building.
Are you confident that no information has been exported from the Treasury Department by DOJ personnel?
Not to my knowledge, Senator.
Have you investigated it to ensure us that that's absolutely correct?
Well, we have strict protocols around that, so there's no reason to believe that there was. Now, in the previous administration, a contractor went to jail and paid, I can't remember, either a $5,000 or $10,000 fine, is serving a stated 5-year term. We don't know the terms of his plea agreement for exporting, I believe, the files of, I don't know, it was 40, 50, 100 of the highest taxpayers in America, including President Trump.
Well, you know, one of the issues here is these are temporary. Their employees or employer status is kind of up in the air, particularly if they're not full-time employees. They work for other companies, et cetera, and they certainly have the technical talents to copy and exploit and expropriate any information they want.
Well, Senator, that's why we took this very seriously in terms of there was a push for them to come in the building. Our staff at Treasury and IRS was very mindful and diligent of everything you've said. So we were very mindful of having proper balances, protocols in place.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you for clarifying that for us, Mr. Secretary. I think that was very helpful to have that.
And Senator, myself just told me all the details there are in the litigation.
Yeah. Thank you very much again, Mr. Secretary, for illuminating us with that explanation. I'll turn to Senator Van Hollen, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. And I know you've just returned back from London, I believe, where you're engaged in the trade negotiations. And I've been trying to keep up with reports as to where those stand. I just have one question regarding that, and that's a headline here that reads that Trump eyeing easing U.S. chip export restrictions to secure Chinese rare earths. I think all of us recognize the vulnerability the United States has with respect to rare earths. It's something that China has decided to limit much more since this trade war got launched in the most recent iteration. But many of us have been very concerned about the diffusion of very high-end chip technology and AI technology to China. So I'm wondering if you can comment on that.
Yes, sir. To the Senator Van Hollen, to the extent that article makes it seem as though there is some quid pro quo, there is not. We have done an extensive analysis within Treasury, Commerce, and all the technology, the White House Office of Science and Technology, on any technology transfer, and we have been very judicious in that. So there is no quid pro quo in terms of chips for rare earths.
Okay, I'm listening carefully, and I understand you're saying there's no quid pro quo. I take it to mean from that there's, you're not saying that we won't increase the access to China of our highest end chip technology. I'm not saying you're saying we are. I'm just asking you haven't ruled that out. Is that, am I interpreting you right?
What I'm saying, there's no intent. You're referring to NVIDIA chips mostly.
I'm referring to NVIDIA chips and the other high-end chips and the manufacturing equipment to produce those chips.
Yes, but in fact, we have done just the opposite. We put export controls on the NVIDIA H20, which I would regard as a very upper-end chip, but not the highest-end chip. So if anything, we have set a...
No, I appreciate the measures some have taken. I would argue building, in some cases, on the Biden administration, but this is why this caught my eye. I just returned from the Senate floor where I have been raising very deep concerns about the deal that was done with the UAE, where on the day before the president left on his trip, rolled back the safeguards that had been put in place by the previous administration, which with, I should add, strong bipartisan support, including the bipartisan joint committee in the House looking into China. So this is an area I think many of us are very concerned about, which is why this headline caught my eye. If I could turn to the cuts to the IRS, and I've followed your comments about how you're able to continue to bring in revenues despite the changes that have been made. I would suggest, Mr. Secretary, that it's way too early to tell. First of all, as you know, a lot of people were fired as probationary employees only to have to be brought back on an emergency basis for tax filing season. So I think it's important we understand that. And the idea that people can really turn around a ship and, implement all these new technology and AI changes to expedite IRS collections, especially from very wealthy people, is something many of us have been pushing for many years. But the notion that this has happened in a very short time, I think, defies logic. So are you predicting that the changes that you've made this year will not result in the IRS collecting less revenue, especially from higher-end individuals than would be predicted this year? Obviously, if the economy continues to grow, revenues grow. But I'm saying, I'm sure you've seen the CBO projections. The CBO says when you make these cuts, you will bring in less revenue from very wealthy people than you otherwise would. Do you agree with that analysis?
I don't, because I could tell you a couple of things. In discussing with my personal tax advisors, that they say that anyone you could bring in with 2 to 3 years of training is virtually worthless. I would say it is like putting me on a basketball court with Steph Curry. We have, from a whistleblower in Atlanta, and this was before I arrived, under Secretary Yellen, there was a problem with the rapid pace of hiring to the quality of individuals hired. If there were two criteria, too high criteria, many only satisfied one, and then there were a few examples of people who were not qualified at all.
I appreciate that. I would just emphasize again, it'd be helpful if your team could get back to me and members of the committee as to what specific assumptions, premises, and conclusions in the CBO report you disagree with. Can you provide us with that?
Yes, sir.
Because I'd like to, the CBO is like our umpire here. They really don't wear a party hat. They call it as they see it. And in this case, we're seeing very different projections that have very meaningful consequences for our deficit. So I'd appreciate that.
Yep. And what I would point out is in our technology innovation, the IRS technology stack update began in 1990. I believe $50 billion has been spent. We were due to spend $3.5 billion this year. We have cut that back because so much of it is wasted, or it's just patches on existing systems. So, and also, as I've said repeatedly, I have 3 goals: collections, privacy, and customer service. And I believe we can enhance all of those, as you clearly are well-versed in AI. And I think that we are at the dawn of being able to greatly increase individual and experienced auditor productivity via AI. So for the upper end tax collector auditors that you brought up, that is what would be considered a plum job. It is something that takes many years of experience. So our goal is to actually be able to enhance their productivity and collections ability with AI.
Thank you. I look forward to getting the analysis that looks at what the CBO has done and where you disagree. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Hagerty, Ranking Member Reed, Secretary Bessent. Welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Senator, nice to see you.
Chairman Hagerty, I'm impressed at your streamlining this hearing. It was striking. And I'm glad we're able to get right into the meat of the conversation. We are today spending more on the interest on our national debt than we are on our national defense. And I applaud your stated support for reducing the federal deficit and trying to get a handle on our national debt, but I struggle to square that with your support for tax policies that will, under CBO's analysis, add at least $2.4 trillion to our debt in the next decade. And given that credit rating agencies have just downgraded U.S. debt, I am concerned that by continuing to pile debt onto our national balance sheet, we will undermine growth, we will damage our ability to borrow, and we will
Yeah, well, your staff should have told us that. Committee will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chair be allowed to call recess at any time without objection so ordered. I welcome our witnesses and thank them for their service to our nation. Today we'll hear from the Department of the Navy regarding the FY26 budget request. While I appreciate the budget documents received last week, we still lack the necessary details to fully evaluate how Congress can best support our sailors and Marines and maritime nation. As a maritime nation, our naval capabilities are central to our ability to deter our adversaries, especially China. We can't do that without growing the surface and submarine fleets. But when it comes to shipbuilding, we remain woefully behind schedule and way over budget. We took the first step towards accelerating shipbuilding and rebuilding our maritime industrial base through the House-passed reconciliation bill. This once-in-a-generation legislation will invest over $34 billion to expand the size and enhance the capability of our naval fleet. It includes funds to field critically needed new capabilities like the FAXX and the unmanned vehicle vessels. These capabilities are essential to deterring China. But it also builds capacity and improves infrastructure across our public shipyards and maritime industrial base. It's not enough to fully fund and rebuild our naval strength. We need to also continue investment in the out years. We need to send a clear demand signal to the industrial base of exactly what we're buying. We also need to reform the way we buy ships. I think the problem starts with a broken requirements process. We've seen it needlessly increase delivery timelines and cost. Shipbuilding isn't the only area impacted by our flawed acquisition process either. The entire defense acquisition system is too slow, rigid, and bureaucratic to meet our needs. To maintain American deterrence, we need to equip our warfighters with what they need and when they need it. Ranking Member Smith and I have introduced legislation to reform our flawed acquisition system. This bipartisan SPEED Act will be foundational to the FY26 NDAA. It streamlines and modernizes defense acquisition, and it ensures that our acquisition process is centered on one primary objective: equipping warfighters in the quickest and most cost-effective manner possible. I look forward to working with my colleagues in the administration on this effort. I know that Secretary Phelan has spent a lot of time examining the problems with the Navy's acquisition process and shipbuilding capacity. I was happy to hear the Secretary is encouraging the use of creative teaming agreements between our traditional shipbuilders and our non-traditional defense companies to expand the nation's maritime and submarine industrial base. I commend him for taking on these complicated issues with a new perspective and innovative solutions. I look forward to hearing his thoughts and recommendations on how to make further improvements. Beyond our acquisition issues, I continue to be concerned with the overall readiness of our naval fleet. We need to realize the 80% surge-ready vision for the entire fleet, including our amphibious forces, in the near future. At the heart of this amphibious ship challenge is the Navy's inability to adequately support amphibious force structure. Half of the amphibious fleet is in unsatisfactory condition, and as a result, we can no longer support a heel-to-toe deploy of our Marine expeditionary forces, and that's unacceptable. Our amphibious forces are the bedrock of our rapid response force and essential for the projection of power in the Indo-PACOM area. We need to fix this problem as soon as possible. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on how we can work together to ensure our sailors and Marines have the resources they need. And with that, I yield to the ranking member for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you summed up the situation quite well. I agree with pretty much everything you said. Budget, starting with that, a couple problems with the budget. One, we don't have one. It's very late. It's later than it's ever been, which gives a degree of uncertainty to the process here that is very difficult to deal with. I spoke with Secretary Phelan yesterday. We tried to talk through a couple ships here and there. We don't know what's going to be asked for and how that's going to work. That process needs to get started soon. Even when we do get the budget, we still have major challenges. We have demands that far outstrip the resources that are available, which means we're going to have to get smart about how we spend our money. A quote I've used often in this committee from Winston Churchill: "Gentlemen, we're out of money, now we're going to have to think." That is going to be really, really true going forward, no matter when that budget comes out. And the chairman correctly identified, two of the big problems. Every ship program that we have is way over budget and way behind. We're struggling through that. We have major capacity issues in terms of workforce and shipyards that we have to try to deal with. So that entire picture, very complicated, very difficult, and short of the resources that we would like to have. So we're going to be very interested in conversation today about how you intend to attack that very difficult problem, readily acknowledging that the gentleman before us here today did not create that problem. This dates back through multiple administrations and a number of years. We just need to work together to figure out how to fix it. And then the problem that the chairman identified, the readiness issue. The ships that we do have are not ready at to the pace that they should be. Some of that is a matter of retiring old ships that are no longer performing. I think there are potentially AI solutions. I've been very impressed with what the Air Force has been able to do with predictive maintenance through the use of AI to make things more, to basically figure out when it's going to break before it breaks and fix it. So we've got a lot of work to do there. I'm interested in how we can work with foreign partners, as long as we still have foreign partners who do have massive shipbuilding capacity and could potentially work with us to help deal with those issues. And then the other challenge is, what's the right mix? We've all seen from the war in Ukraine and from the rapid pace of innovation just the amazing things that autonomous systems have been able to accomplish. How do we factor that into the fleet while we are still, building aircraft carriers and destroyers, submarines and all of that? What is the right mix of those capabilities? And then the final point, what has really become the battle, is survivability. being able to have missile defense capabilities, counter-drone capabilities, secure communications, to make sure that we can continue to communicate with our weapon systems as they're being deployed in the face of adversary efforts to disrupt that. All of that needs to come together in a coherent plan. We are clearly not there at the moment, but in the next couple of months, as the budget comes in, as we begin to work through this, those are the challenges that we're all going to have to work together to try to meet. It's not going to be easy. I don't pretend that anyone has, a simple answer or that it's any one specific person's fault. But these are major, major challenges that we're going to need to resolve if we're going to be able to meet the defense needs and the national security needs of our country. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Ranking Member yields back. I'd like to now introduce our witnesses. The Honorable John Phelan, Secretary of the Navy. Admiral James Kilby, Acting Chief of Naval Operations, and General Eric Smith, Commandant of the Marine Corps. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for your service to our country. Secretary Phelan, we'll start with you. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today alongside General Smith and Admiral Kilby. I'm grateful to President Trump for the trust he's placed in me to lead this department and serve as the 79th Secretary of the Navy. I'm also grateful to this committee for your continued support of our Navy Marine Corps team. Distinguished members of this committee, my North Star as Secretary is readiness. Before a dollar is spent on any capability, an exquisite platform, or infrastructure, I will always ask the following question: what is the impact to our readiness? And does it increase or does it add to it? If the answer is no, we will not spend that dollar. As stated to this committee before, I'm focused on 3 priority areas. First, strengthening shipbuilding in the maritime industrial base. Second, fostering adaptive, accountable, and innovative warfighter culture. Third, improving the health, welfare, and training of our people, our sailors, Marines, and their families. Since my confirmation 2.5 months ago, I've been on a listening and learning tour. I've traveled across the country and visited some of our allies overseas. I visited our public, private, and overseas shipyards, as well as our installations. And I've met with many of our sailors, Marines, and shipyard workers. What I have learned is this: we are still the dominant naval power, but our adversaries are closing the gap at a concerning and accelerating rate. We need to make important cultural and strategic changes in order to maintain our competitive advantage. And we need to address a culture, one riddled with bureaucratic decision-making and gold-plated requirements, that is endemic to this department. Because there is no doubt we are operating in a world that is more hostile and unpredictable. As evidenced by recent conflicts, warfare as we know it is changing dramatically. China is no longer just a pacing threat. It is our primary competitor, both economically and militarily. With their naval fleet nearing 400 ships, China's goal is not the defense of its homeland only. It is the forward projection of power and influence. In the Indo-Pacific, our Navy Marine Corps team is deepening cooperation with our allies and partners to strengthen deterrence and keep open our sea lines of communication. At home, they are supporting homeland defense through Task Force Zapper, providing surveillance, logistics, and manpower at the southern border. And in the Red Sea, they've defeated scores of missiles and drones from Iranian-backed Houthis, helped defend our regional allies, and guaranteed access to a major artery of global trade. Our global presence sends a clear message to the world. The United States Navy and Marine Corps are prepared and ready to fight and win anytime and anywhere. However, our naval superiority is under threat. For too long, we have allowed our shipbuilding industry to erode, hollowing out the very capacity we need to maintain credible naval deterrence. That must change. Rebuilding our maritime industrial base is not just a matter of economic policy, it is a national security imperative. President Trump's executive order on restoring America's maritime dominance highlights that urgency and has begun to put us on the right path. I have been to 10 shipyards, 7 here in the United States and 3 overseas, and I've spoken directly with shipyard leaders and the hardworking tradesmen essential to our maritime operations. I now have a clear picture of our challenges, and I'm developing a plan to fix what's broken. We need to act with urgency, and this will take a whole-of-government approach to rebuild our capacity and expertise. We are developing a deliberate, actionable plan to restore our industrial base, but we cannot do it alone. Congress, private industry, and the Department of Navy must work collaboratively if we are serious about ensuring our naval superiority. In closing, it is clear that our greatest asset is the extraordinary men and women who serve, our sailors and Marines. We will continue to invest in them through smarter recruitment, better training, and targeted retention efforts to retain top-tier talent. And we will prioritize quality of service initiatives to ensure that our sailors, Marines, and their families have the resources they need. Marine General Charles Krulak aptly stated that the future of an organization is in the hands of the privates in the field, not the generals back home. Our job, my job, is to ensure they have every tool, every advantage, and every ounce of support they need to succeed. Thank you for your support. I look forward to your questions today.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. That's our job, too. I appreciate you highlighting that. Admiral Kilby, you're recognized next.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the United States Navy today. Your Navy provides the nation with sea power and sea control that is needed to preserve our way of life and ensure our security and prosperity. Your oversight and funding ensure we are ready when the nation calls. I'm pleased to testify alongside Secretary Phelan, who brings needed and unique skills and experiences to help us accelerate the work of the Navy, and alongside my partner, General Smith, the Commandant of the Marine Corps. In the past year, our sailors have defeated hundreds of drones and missiles and executed dozens of strikes from the Red Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. They have strengthened alliances and deterred Chinese aggression in the Western Pacific, and they have supported operations on the southern border. They have maintained an unbroken strategic deterrent with our ballistic missile submarines. In short, the Navy, integrated with the Joint Force, remains postured and ready to fight and win. We remain committed to a strong global Navy, one that is prepared to defend our homeland, deter our adversaries, and prevail in war. We are laser-focused on China as our most consequential opponent, and while strengthening our defenses in the homeland. We prioritize our operations, training, and readiness accounts to ensure our naval forces remain ready, resilient, and able to execute national tasking. The Navy and Marine Corps preserves peace through strength through investments in our strategic deterrence, our defense industrial base, and our installations via initiatives like the Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Program. Most importantly, we are continuing our strong commitment to our people, our sailors, our Navy families, and our civilians through pay raises and investments in quality of service such as unaccompanied housing and child care. But we are facing some challenges. First, our platforms are not as ready as they need to be. We set an ambitious goal to make 80% of our submarines, ships, and aircraft combat surge ready by 1 January 2027, and we're not there. To do that, we are reducing maintenance delays and improving manning, training, modernization, and sustainment. Secondly, the Navy has 22,950 gaps at sea. Thanks to process improvements and targeted investments, we are on plan to reduce that number significantly by the end of 2026. We are committed to attracting and developing Americans who can innovate, solve hard problems, and dominate in combat. The Navy contracted over 40,000 sailors last year, the most since 2003, and we are currently on pace to exceed that recruiting goal for 2025. Thirdly, our ordnance expenditures in the Red Sea have highlighted the strain on our munitions industrial base. The Navy is working with traditional primes and new entrants to close this gap, developing kinetic and non-kinetic weapons at speed and scale. In all of these efforts, consistent and predictable funding is foundational. We appreciate the continued support of this committee. In closing, I'm proud of our Navy's accomplishments in the past year, and I'm excited about the growing consensus that is powering our maritime rejuvenation. This whole-of-government and whole-of-nation approach is essential to our security and prosperity. We have work to do to ensure that we remain the most powerful Navy in the world for the next 250 years. Your leadership and support are critical in achieving this imperative. On behalf of the sailors and civilians and families around the world, thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. General Smith, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to appear before you today alongside Secretary Phelan and Admiral Kilby, my shipmate, to represent your Marine Corps. I'm going to keep my comments short so I can answer your questions. First, I'd like to start by sharing the Marine Corps' top 3 priorities. First is restoring a 3.0 amphibious ready group Marine Expeditionary Unit presence. This simply means 1 amphibious ready group constantly deployed off the East Coast, 1 constantly deployed off the West Coast to cover down on the totality of the Pacific, and 1 episodically deployed out of Okinawa, Japan, our FDNF, our forward deployed naval force. The amphibious ready group with the Marine Expeditionary Unit embarked is the most versatile tool in our nation's inventory. It is truly the Swiss Army knife of the joint force. We're working closely with our Navy partners to maximize this capability. My second priority is accelerating force design. Force design is our journey to adapt to the changing character of war. The nature of war remains constant, but the character changes. We're in the implementation phase now. We're fielding new capabilities and reshaping formations across the force, from our Marine Expeditionary Units and Marine Littoral Regiments to our Marine Expeditionary Forces. And finally, improving quality of life. Every Marine deserves a clean, safe place to lay their head down at night. Barracks 2030 is how we're getting after this. This is our most consequential housing investment in history. It is a quality of life issue that goes beyond our barracks. We're also investing in the well-being of Marine families, because you recruit the Marine, but you retain the family. And retaining our Marines means supporting those who stand beside them. I'll close with this. Your Marines remain the most ready when the nation is least ready. That's our mantra. A forward-postured force, trained for combat, and built to deliver flexible, lethal options anytime, anywhere. Thank you again for your trust and support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. I recognize myself first for questions. Secretary Phelan, since you took your position, you've been conducting reviews of shipbuilding programs. Can you tell us what your takeaways are from those reviews, and what are your plans to get our shipbuilding programs back on track?
Thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, I don't have good news. All of our programs are a mess, to be honest. We are behind schedule and over budget. I think our best performing one is 6 months late and 57% over budget. So I am working very hard to try to get...
And you said that's the best one?
That is the best one, I believe. So we are working very hard to get these fixed. Now, I think the Navy has begun to make some rapid changes at the public shipyards, and we've been talking, I've met with both with Electric Boat and Huntington Ingalls when I was at their yards, in terms of some of the changes we are trying to make to shift the schedule left, particularly on those platforms that are extremely important, like the Columbia and Virginia class submarines. I think we've got some plans in place that will help shift that schedule left, and then we are working on the costs and trying to understand the whole procurement way we procures, and the way we're going to attempt to budget going forward, or not budget, contract going forward with them. And so I would tell you, as I think I said in my opening statement, this is really a whole of government approach. I think there's 2 ways to look at it. There's a two ways I look at it. There's a short run and a long run. In the short run, I have got to get hulls in the water. And so that means all options are open. So we have to look at foreign and domestic. In the long run, I've got to get the maritime industrial base in this country back on its feet, because it's strategic, and that will take a longer amount of time, but we will have to do it. We have enough business today. We could not fulfill all the business we have today in the United States. So we have to probably expand shipyards. We probably need to open new shipyards as well.
And expand on that. How can we help you do that? And how would that functionally work?
So I think, Congressman, we're still in the early stages of putting these thoughts together. I think it will it's obviously going to require capital. It's going to require not having 5-year environmental studies and huge bureaucracy to get things done. We will need to move with speed. And I think, I look forward, once we have that plan, to working with this committee and coming to you with some real specifics around it. But, I feel like I'm in a perpetual game of whack-a-mole whenever I kind of unveil something or look at some new program. Right now, I've been very focused on the subs because it is critical and we need to get that done. And we just recently did the Virginia contract. We've got another big contract coming up, which we need to deal with. I'm just kind of step by step going through. Now I got to deal with carriers, then I'll deal with DDGs. And we will just go step by step through each one of these and try to get that done and figure out, diagnose the problems and get them done. But I also would say to you, look, we've got a work shortage. We've got to get more workers. I think the wage package we put together in Groton and Quonset was a good step forward on the Virginia contracts, and I thank this committee for that. I think that we need to get much more efficient, much better. When I was in Korea, I got in a DDG that's 10% bigger than ours. A very good ship, third of the cost, and built in 3 years.
Well, you've painted a very bleak picture, and the truth is we need accurate. If it's ugly, we need to know it's ugly. You talked about having coming up with a plan to resolve this or take these challenges on. What timeline do you think you'll need to be able to put that plan together?
So I'm on day 72 of the job. I am pushing very, very hard to try to have something done in the next 30 to 60 days with a kind of complete kind of idea of where I'm at. It just really depends what else happens and what pops, but I'm working very hard. And again, it's just methodically. I had to go see the shipyards. I had to go see the programs. Now, look.
Well, we just need you to get us information as soon as possible. We're going to try to do the NDA in mid-July. If you want us to help you with that product, you need to try to get us something by then. I yield to the ranking member.
Thanks. Just following up on that, as you know, the chairman and I are working on an acquisition reform process, full committee is. And, when you make those statements about how quickly other places are able to build ships, a lot of it, I think, comes down to regulations and requirements. The requirements process is an endless rotating nightmare that is completely disconnected in many instances from a usable product. And I think we agree with that. I've often made the joke that if I could, I would snap my fingers and eliminate half of all regulations, and I don't care which half. That's probably not a smart way to go about it, but we seem to make no progress on this. So just for all three of you, I'm curious, how would you blow up that regulations process, shrink it down so it stops sucking us into this? And it's not the only problem, I will grant you, but it certainly seems to be really a big part of the problem. Admiral, you want to take the first stab at that?
Hey, sir, thanks for that question. One of the things taking a page out of the Ukraine lessons learned and what's happening with the Houthis is we must go faster. So I think abandoning the idea that we have to have an approved program of record before we proceed is something we have to consider for capabilities like unmanned to get them out faster. So we were working on a legislative that came out for a rapid capabilities office in NAVAIR, and I asked for that to include the entire Navy. We are going to talk to the Secretary about that, but to me, that thing within the Navy could allow us to deliver capability faster. I acknowledge the tenets of the SPEED Act and the desire to remove holdups there, and I think that that's good. My sense is we're going to need some rigidity to make our traditional platforms, some consistency that allows you to fund and develop things and have confidence in the program, and at the same time, some flexibility to develop unmanned things that we're not wedded to. So we are doing that with PAC Fleet and supporting them trying to get them a capability by 1 January 2027 for a mission area we call non-traditional sea denial, which is largely unmanned. I think that is a good foreshadow of where we need to go.
Thanks. General Smith, I don't know, or Secretary Phelan, you want to go first?
Thanks, sir. Sir, I'd echo my shipmate, Admiral Kilby. You know, for an example, drone technology. We can additive manufacture and 3D print drones right now. We're doing it at Quantico. What we need is the authority to operate them, the authority to train with them. And so being able to do additive manufacturing and 3D printing without relying on a specific vendor to produce something for us is really key. Because I don't want to have to pay a vendor for something that I can do myself.
Yeah, we would love to empower you on that step as part of our reform effort. Mr. Secretary.
So a couple things. One, you know, look, we have the Navy in particular, as you alluded to in your opening statement, we have been deferring maintenance on ships. We have underinvested in our infrastructure. And all those bills are coming due. We are kind of at the end of what we can defer. And that's one of the problems that's going on. So I don't think the Navy's totally to blame, to be honest. The problem also is requirements happen both from the Navy and from this body to some extent.
Yeah.
And people...
We are part of the problem. I readily acknowledge that, and something we need to fix.
Yeah, and we need to really try to get that resolved. I think the other thing, just in the Navy's defense, a lot of these things are brand new. These submarines we're building right now they look a lot like old submarines. They are very different. Same thing with the carriers. So some of the problems we've had is first in class, and the problem is, I think with the Navy, we tend to want to have everything perfect before we start it. And we've got to stop that. We've got to get it in the water, let's iterate, and then make the second and third one better. The other thing is we tend to create multiple classes of things. So take the V-22, I think there's almost 438 of them. We have 70 different varieties of V-22. Okay, now I'm still waiting for the comprehensive report on that to understand it. But to your point, we've got to get the requirements down. We've got to make this simpler. There's one thing when you're building, and it's a business I know very well. It's called schedule. If you don't stay to the schedule, you are going to be over budget and you are going to get killed.
Well, the phrase, the perfect the enemy of the good, is just so emblematic of everything we do on so many different projects and pieces that lead us to that incredibly high cost. And then forget perfect, we don't have anything. It takes forever, and it just spends all of the money. So I applaud those efforts. Look forward to working with you. I yield back. Thanks.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mike Rogers, for your leadership. And indeed, I'm really grateful to be here with you. Each of you, I'm a Navy dad. As I mentioned to you, my son just retired, Lieutenant Commander at Beaufort Naval Hospital, and just appreciate he glued the Marines back together at Parris Island and at Marine Corps Air Station. And then I'm grateful, too, that my late father-in-law received the Navy Cross as a Marine. He was part of a contingent of Clemson cadets that actually seized Shuri Castle at Okinawa, the castle of the Ryukyu Kingdom. And so we identify. And then I was on ground level. I was, in high school, a Sea Cadet at the Charleston Naval Base. So I particularly appreciate what you do. We appreciate all of you for a strong America through peace, through strength. We are in a Cold War we did not choose, between dictators with rule of gun invading democracies with rule of law. War criminal Putin, the regime in Tehran, and the Chinese Communist Party continue to modernize their capabilities and rapidly expand what we are forced to react to, and we have changes in the battlefield. President Donald Trump is correct. The Iranian regime must not have a nuclear bomb to achieve their goal of death to Israel, death to America. The U.S. must remain ahead of our adversaries to ensure we do not fall behind, again, with the goal of peace through strength. With that in mind, Mr. Secretary, and also I want to congratulate you. I have a grandson at SMU, junior, okay? So I know your academic background is extraordinary. It's almost as good as the Naval Academy. We are witnessing the unprecedented buildup and modernization of China's military. They're building ships at an alarming rate, and their defensive capabilities continue to expand. What more can be done with sufficient Navy resources to deter or fend off an attack on Taiwan by the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah, I'll start, sir, and yield to the Secretary. You know, we've been studying this in the Navy for a long time. We have a global series of war games we conduct at Newport at the Navy War College, and we have very experienced commanders like Admiral Paparo and Admiral Kaler, who their responsibility is to work this. There are 5 areas we are focused on in the Navy: long-range fires, counter C5 ISRT, which is being able to counter the Chinese ability to track us, terminal defense of our ships, because we've got to be able to defend them, and contested logistics. The last area is this area called non-traditional sea denial, and that came out of study and thought from Admiral Paparo when he was the Pac Fleet Commander, that we needed to make Taiwan a very difficult target to take. So we're investing in those. We're experimenting in those. I was, several weeks ago, I was out in San Diego with Admiral Kaler and Admiral Paparo as they were working some of these technologies together to deliver them at pace. So I think the Navy views ourselves as a central point for Admiral Paparo, who is the combatant commander responsible for this, to prevent that from happening, and we are focused on it.
Well, I want to thank you because indeed it's peace through strength and protect the people of Taiwan, and then hopefully the Chinese Communist Party see the unintended consequence, of my view, of failures by war criminal Putin, which is strengthen NATO. Who would imagine with Finland and Sweden now being members, but aside from that, Germany going to 5%. So truly the Communist Party needs to see that an invasion of Taiwan would be catastrophic. And then General Smith, in your testimony, you mentioned the lessons learned from war criminals Putin's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. And, for example, with the UAVs, how is the Marine Corps preparing?
Well, Congressman, thanks for that. What we know is if you can be sensed, you can be targeted, and if you can be targeted, you can be killed. So first you have to have a lower signature going in. You have to mimic or be able to cancel out your own signature to hide in plain sight. And that's something that we're working on very, very hard. You also have to be able to protect yourself against drone technology. So our counter-drone technology, basically our MRIC, our medium-range intercept capability, other counter-drone technologies that we're working on, that is key to being able to protect our Marines on the ground, wherever they may be in the Pacific or be it in the EUCOM AOR.
Thank you all for your great service. And 1.2, at Paris Island, I was there, and to see young people talking to their family members saying, I'm the slug in human debris you sent here. You changed personnel very well. Thank you.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again to all 3 witnesses for your testimony this morning. Secretary Phelan, I want to publicly thank you for releasing the wage improvement funds for submarine workers that Congress authorized and funded last December. Those funds, which were released on April 30th, made a critical difference to settle the Marine draftsmen's contract impasse, as well as boost the wage rates of metal trades workers in southern New England by 30% over a 5-year span. This wage increase for our shipbuilders is going to create the separation in terms of the labor market to make sure that these jobs bring in new hires as well as retain workers, which again, Admiral Rucker did some amazing work in terms of analyzing that issue last year. And again, the timing of your decision, as I said, made a critical difference. I also want to point to your testimony, pages 13 and 14, where you gave very vigorous support for AUKUS. And echoed actually Admiral Paparo when he testified here a few weeks ago about, again, the advantages to the U.S. In terms of AUKUS. Your testimony walked through the joint training that's happening right now between our 2 navies, as well as joint training in terms of shipyard workers from Australia, Guam, and Hawaii, which again is going to, I think, enhance, not burden, U.S. readiness. I was wondering if you could talk about that for a second.
Congressman, thank you for the question. Yeah, look, submarines are our critical asymmetric advantage, and obviously Australia and the United Kingdom are our closest allies, and in particularly in the undersea domain. My immediate concern as Secretary of the Navy is to improve our submarine production rate and our maintenance throughput so that we can make sure that we are meeting all of our commitments, our internal commitments, and then any future AUKUS commitments. But I need to do that without making sure we're sacrificing any combat capability for the combatant commanders that we need in the Western Pacific.
Having said that, I mean, I think that as you and I discussed when you were in Groton, again, there were 2 delivered last year. New Jersey and Iowa. There are going to be 2 delivered this year, Massachusetts and Idaho, and there'll be 2 delivered the following year, Arkansas and Utah. Again, but as your testimony stated, you know, really the advantages of AUKUS, which Admiral Paparo emphatically stated also, is that it actually enhances our position in the Indo-Pacific, creating an Indian Ocean rotation out of Perth. Again, as well as getting deeper collaboration, which is critical to the Indo-Pacific. So again, I would encourage you, again, to sort of continue, obviously, working with Congress. We authorized the AUKUS powers in 2023. There's strong interest, bipartisan interest on this committee. And again, I think the investment by Australia, $500 million into our industrial base, which we had to pass a law to allow that to actually happen, again, shows that this is clearly a bilateral commitment between the 2 countries. Admiral Kilby, you again walked through the combat surge readiness for the different parts of the Navy. As far as submarines, which again is part of the inventory question that the Secretary was mentioning as far as AUKUS is concerned, the number is 72%. It's not where we want it to be. We want it to be at 80%. But I remember well when Admiral Houston took over at Naval Reactors in January 2024, it was at 60%. So clearly the public yards like Portsmouth and others are really stepping up their game, and we're seeing that number move in the right direction. Isn't that correct?
It is, sir, but I'm not satisfied. I think there's work to be done here. I don't mean to be, negative about it, but I'm focused on 80%, and you have to have an audacious goal to change people's behavior. And so my belief is we've got some efficiencies we can get at. I think there's some focus we can apply to both submarines and aircraft carrier production and workers, and we can really empower that worker and take barriers away, the same barriers that we talked about.
But I just remind you, this committee, was ahead of the curve in terms of getting PSYOP money so that these public yards can finally, belatedly, get the capacity to get those boats moving out, and it's happening in real time, as anyone visits Portsmouth can see vividly. And again, we all want to be at 80%. The point is that the trend is certainly heading in the right direction compared to where it was really just a year and a half ago.
Sir, I'm in a violent agreement with you, and I'm still on the case.
Okay.
We have 17 boats that are in some kind of availability, and my target's 10.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair, now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses today, Admiral Kilby, Secretary Phelan, General Smith. Thanks again. Thanks for the incredible job you're doing. Gentlemen, I want to begin with submarines. We had a hearing last week with leadership in the Navy. I was assured that we would not repeat the budget request from FY25. We only requested 1 Virginia-class submarine. I look forward to a request coming over this year that will, at the minimum, request 2. We know where we are. Mr. Courtney pointed out where we are as far as ASUBO, operational availability of submarines. I still want to get a perspective on where we are with the number of submarines. Admiral Kilby, is the requirement still 66 attack submarines?
It is, sir.
Are we anywhere close to that at this point?
We are not.
Do we still have the plan to recondition some 688s to repower them to help us get closer to that number?
Yes, sir, we do.
Secretary Phelan, I know that you've talked a lot about the importance of submarines. It is the one significant strategic advantage that we have over the Chinese, and we know too the AUKUS agreement is incredibly important. Will you commit to work with Congress to make sure that we are getting as quickly as we can to producing 2 Virginia-class a year, 1 Columbia-class per year, with the goal of producing 2.3 Virginia-class submarines per year in order to meet not only our requirement, but also the requirement we've committed to under AUKUS?
Congressman, thanks for the question. I know it's important to you. Obviously, our submarine production...
Well, it's important to the nation, too, so not just to me.
I understand. Look, our submarines, as I said, are critical. That's why it's the first yard I went to and where I spent the most time. We are committed to getting to our production rates up, to getting us what we need. So, yes, you have that commitment.
Let me jump over, Secretary, to carrier production, another important part of that. We know the span of platforms is going to be key. I want to make sure that we are all here on the same page as far as the importance of a long lead time material purchase, especially for things like CVN 82. I've been assured that we are on track to be able to do that. This year, I think, needs to be that first step in that direction. And we know when we bought 2 carriers at a time, when we bought 80 and 81, we know how much money we saved in doing that. We know what it does to provide certainty to the industrial base. We know that we have to do the same, I believe, with CVN 82 and 83. Will you commit to working with this committee to make sure we keep our aircraft carrier production on track with the same efficiency and scheduling that we've been able to achieve with CVN 80 and 81, as we will, hopefully, with the path for CVN 82 and 83?
Congressman, thanks for the question. Look, carrier strike is a cornerstone to our naval power, and it's necessary for the current and all future fights. I would say that what we are doing right now, and we do have some issues with 80 and 81 that we are working on as we speak to try to make sure that the schedule is on time. We are looking at the entire force and trying to understand manned, unmanned, both in air, sea, and undersea, and what is the right balance,
Sure.
and what is the right way to kind of have that work. And so we continue to look at that. As I will say to you, the carriers are quite important to the force and force structure, and we are. I look forward to working with you as that posture review gets done.
Thank you. Admiral Kilby, I want to now focus on amphibs. We know that Congress has been very laser focused on that by setting a floor of 31 operational amphibs, also making sure we have a maintenance plan that allows us to achieve a persistent 3.0 ARG-MU presence. We've known in the last 3 requests in AFRICOM, we haven't been able to meet the crisis response request that's come out with our amphibs. In the Navy's latest update, in the update it states 3.0 ARG-MU presence is not a requirement. That's pretty interesting when Congress says that the 31 floor is a requirement and that we require a maintenance plan to achieve 3.0. Why does the Navy characterize the 3.0 ARG-MU presence as optional?
I don't mean it to characterize it as optional. I want to maximize the availability of our amphibious ships, and I've done poorly in that, particularly in WASP and Boxer deployments. So I'm committed to getting our amphibious maintenance done on time so the Marines can embark and we can deploy as scheduled for the global force management process. Our shipbuilding numbers, as you know, come from force structure assessments which are derived in our shipbuilding plan. And the shipbuilding plan that we have maintained has been 31. My estimate is I need the 46 amphibious ships.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from
3.0.
California, Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Phelan, I was impressed and quite pleased by your testimony, both written and oral today, and your focus on the industrial base, the ability of America to build ships, to repair ships, and the focus that you have. I was hoping that my colleague, Mr. Kelly, would be here as I spoke and bring to your attention the SHIPS Act, which is the implementation of the President's executive order about about our industrial base, military industrial base, and the maritime industrial base. I look forward to working with you on the implementation of that. There are multiple ways in which that will have to be carried out, but the essence of the SHIPS Act is to rebuild our commercial maritime base, and in doing so, enhance the ability of the naval shipbuilding to be done. So we got a lot of work out ahead of us. I would ask for your support and any ideas and suggestions you have about the SHIPS Act. We expect to move it this year. Maybe we'll get it done, but it does have bipartisan and bicameral support. So with that having been said, one of the challenges that the SHIPS Act will address is the contested logistics challenge. It's pretty clear right now that we do not have the capability of maintaining our fleet in the Western Pacific through a long period of time because we do not have the logistical support available. To achieve that, the SHIPS Act goes a long way, but there's another piece to it, and that is the use of the Jones Act fleet as an opportunity to provide the necessary logistical maritime support. We are moving this along. We would look at the Jones Act fleet and develop a program in which some of those ships, for example, tankers and roll-on, roll-offs, would be built to military specifications. Going to have to put a little bit of DoD money into it to achieve that, but then those ships would be available like the aircraft in the CRAFT program. So I draw your attention to that as a solution to meet the necessary logistical support, not only in the Pacific, but also in other parts of the world. Now, are you willing to work with us on these two areas? First of all, the SHIPS Act and the implementation of the executive order, and finally the use of the Jones Act fleet as a backstop for the logistic support that the Navy will need.
Thank you, Congressman, for the question, and I know it's an issue important to you and that you've spent time on. Look, I think the SHIPS Act has a lot of great aspects to it, and we have given some of our comments in on it, so I think it is critical to helping us with the maritime industrial base. In terms of commercial shipbuilding and military shipbuilding, it is something the Chinese do very, very well. And we need to start thinking about that more and more in terms of how we modify commercial ships and with military issues in mind. So it is something we are spending time on and looking at and trying to get better ideas of how to do it. Because I think, as Admiral Paparo likes to say, it's how many holes in the ground can you get? And we are trying to make sure we can optimize that. And if a conflict does take place, commercial and logistic ships will be very, very important to that effort.
There's an example next to you with the Marine Corps, who have found that some of the offshore support vessels for the petroleum industry can be modified and used immediately by the Marine Corps. I'll let that stay there. Admiral Kilby, you knew I was going to go here. And that has to do with that, how do we make sure that the ships that are supposed to be going into availability are prepared for that availability, that the status, the capability of the ships are known before they even arrive at the repair facility.
I'll just use one brief example, recognizing where we are in time. But USS America is going to go into availability. She has 191 open and inspect actions that were originally planned for the availability. We've pulled that left and are working with the fleet commander to do those open inspects early so we can properly inform the package.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Really appreciate your time. Earlier this year, the U.S. Navy announced the future Bethesda-class expeditionary medical ship will be named the USNS Portsmouth. This modernized vessel will deliver life-saving capabilities, sailing faster than both the Mercy and the Comfort, while providing world-class forward-deployed medical care wherever needed. Admiral Kilby, would you describe how these advanced medical vessels are essential to Navy Medical Corps' ability to deliver care in the time of conflict, and how this ship will factor into the distributed maritime operations concept?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. I've been involved with this effort for some number of years, really excited about the medical community running at this and working to get involved in the requirements process, and they worked faster than most. This vessel is a Roll 2 care vessel. So realizing we have 2 hospital ships, we wanted to increase the density of our ships to be able to respond to massive casualties. So we're really good at medevacs of 1, 2, 3 sailors. We said, what if we have 50 sailors in the water? How do we respond to that? And this ship is a response to that action. So it really gets at the contested logistics problem, and we need to continue to work for solutions like that. But I'm optimistic about this ship and what it will do for us, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate that. I know there's some challenges, especially this year with the budget, with the shipbuilding capacity, but I do think it's important, like you do as well. And I think especially when you're looking at the Indo-PACOM theater, it's critical. With the continually emerging threats in Indo-PACOM, we must possess unmanned undersea capabilities that meet the growing need for submerged operational awareness and payload delivery. Growth in the private market is generating new solutions in commercial undersea technology while reducing procurement and operational costs for the military. Secretary Phelan, how is the Navy looking to leverage commercially available unmanned underwater vehicles to meet emerging mission needs and capability gaps? And what can be done to accelerate the fielding of these platforms across the fleet?
Congressman, good to see you. Thanks for the question. Look, we are testing a number of different unmanned platforms, but in the air, on the water, and under the sea. We are definitely pushing very hard with new companies. When I traveled to Indo-PACOM and then came back, I stopped in Los Angeles and spent some time with a big 3D manufacturing company and another company, Anduril, who's doing some things that we're testing. Ceronics, another company that the Navy is testing products with. So, and Saildrone is another one which I met at the Sea Air Space conference here. So we are testing a number of different ones to see, and I think one of the keys, and I think where we need to kind of change in the Navy, again, this comes to a cultural change. We tend to test it, and then if it doesn't work, we're like, next. In the private market, as you know, we iterate. Tell us what's wrong, tell us what's not working, let us try to fix it and make it better. And so this Rapid Technologies Office that the Admiral and I have been talking about is another way of doing that. And I think, look, to be perfectly honest, I think one of the things we need, and I hope the speed legislation covers this, is we need flexibility when it comes to unmanned because the technology is moving so rapidly. If you look at what happened in the Ukraine in that recent conflict, that was a very different drone than one they had a month ago. Mm-hmm. And so to be stuck with a program with that platform, we can't have that. So we are going to need more flex when we spend, particularly in unmanned, because of the speed. And so I think the way we procure on unmanned is something that I look forward to working with this committee on and doing that. If there's specific programs, I know Admiral Kilby could address that.
Yes, sir. I think you're absolutely right. I think the companies you mentioned, Anduril, Ceronic, people like that, they're ready, they're willing, they want to do this. And I think like we've learned a lot over the last few years with what's going on in Ukraine and Russia and what's happening in the Red Sea. We have to get on top of this. This is where the future's at. And, obviously anything we can do from this committee to help, I will be anxious to assist that. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
I thank the gentleman. And Mr. Secretary, I would urge you, I know you've got a lot on your plate, but make sure the folks that are with you that work on acquisition are looking at our SPEED Act, and if there's things that we need to add that aren't in there, it is a product that's still evolving and developing, and I would say the same thing to the General and the Admiral. We want your input. We want this to be meaningful reform that's going to make a difference so we can get after these rapid technological advancements, because you're exactly right. We cannot keep doing things the way we've been doing it and expect to be successful in the future with what you just described. So I ask for your help. With that, I recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Smith, I've questioned you repeatedly over the past 2 years about what actual progress Marines have made on the ground in the Pacific, putting the theory of force design into practice to meet the China threat. Having recently returned from the Philippines, I was more impressed than I imagined with what your Marines have already achieved. So please keep pressing. General Smith, I also questioned you repeatedly about what the realities are on the ground in Quantico, where you're training the future leaders of the Corps. And I'm concerned that standards have been lowered to keep up graduation numbers. Part of the blame, I know, lies with some of my colleagues here in Congress. So I want to make clear that many of us want you to keep standards high. He is the best who is trained in the severest school, and students who fail should be out, period. General, when the basic school used to require a 20-mile hike, but that has now been reduced 25% to 15 miles, how is that not lowering the standard?
Yeah, Congressman, thanks for that question, and I appreciate your continued advocacy for the basic school. As you know, we produce the most lethal warriors there. We have simply modified our standard. When I went through the basic school, we conducted a 25-mile McCrest hike, carrying full kit, carrying a base plate, a bipod.
I understand, General, but here's my problem. The McCree standard in the fleet is still 20 miles with 70 pounds.
Right.
So you're training, you're asking Marine leaders to meet a standard below what what Lance Corporals and PFCs they'll lead in the fleet have to meet.
Well, what I would say, Congressman, is most of the officers coming out of the fleet, coming out of TBS, are not infantry officers. Those that are infantry officers will go on to the infantry officer course, where, as you know, the standards are incredibly high.
Right, but if you're a logistics officer assigned to an infantry battalion, you still have to march with the battalion. Right?
You do.
So, General, have you graduated any officers from TBS who failed to make the 15-mile hike?
We have not, sir.
Okay, I've heard that's not the case from basic school students themselves when I had lunch with them back in February, so please take confirmation of that for the record.
Will do.
General Smith, do you still believe the Marine Corps philosophy of train how we fight?
I do.
So I checked with the Marines in the Pacific, and they don't have ice baths to cool off when you get hot. We didn't have them in Iraq either. So why is that luxury afforded to officers at TBS at every hike break?
Well, what I would say, Congressman, is we want to train smarter, not harder.
Well, do they understand that their Marines will not have that in the fleet?
They do understand that, but if I have that ability to provide that additional care, then I'm going to do that to make.
I just want to make sure they're trained to a warfighting standard.
They are warfighting focused, I guarantee you, Congressman.
I don't believe that the Chinese Army has ice baths. Now, the Corps is proud of making its numbers when every other service has failed, but top-line numbers are only as good as the Marines who make them up. So that's why I want to make sure you feel the pressure from this committee to keep up those standards. Admiral Kilby, if you were defending the Taiwan Strait, what would you rather have, one aircraft carrier or $13 billion worth of unmanned systems?
It's a hard question to answer without qualifying questions, but if I could put those drones on Taiwan, I'd put them on Taiwan.
Well, I'm good. I'm glad to hear that. Many admirals have not answered that question the same way, but I'll tell you, every junior officer that I've asked this question of, and I ask this question a lot, has said what you just did, which is we'd rather take that $13 billion aircraft carrier money and put it towards unmanned systems.
I did have a qualifier, though.
I get it. We don't have time for all the qualifiers. But General Smith, drones are now responsible for over 70% of casualties in Ukraine, more than any other weapon system combined. What portion of the Marine Corps budget is spent on unmanned systems?
I can't give you an exact number, but it is a small percentage.
I've been told it's 2%. So if the goal is lethality, and that's 70% of lethality in Ukraine, how much more lethal would the Marine Corps be if you doubled that to a mere 4%?
Yeah, we would obviously be more lethal.
And how much time does each lieutenant at TBS spend taking out targets with drones?
I'll have to get back to you on that with an exact answer, but the answer is limited.
It's limited. How much time does each lieutenant spend taking out targets with rifles?
Multiple hours.
Yeah, several weeks of training on the rifle.
But as you know, sir, every Marine's a rifleman. That's our creed.
Right, and I love rifles. Rifles were also invented in the 15th century. Look, horses are still great animals too. I just wonder whether we should have more horses at Camp Pendleton than we have drones at TBS. We've got to aggressively make sure that our warfighters are prepared for the future fight. And the future fight is today, when in Ukraine, 70% of casualties are with drones. So I want to see those Marine lieutenants out there getting drones on target as much or more as they're doing that with their rifles. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Admiral Kilby, can drones provide an airfield anywhere in the world that provides a strike group of U.S. sovereign airfield like a carrier can, like we just did against the Houthis? Can drones give you that capability that an aircraft carrier to have a sovereign airfield in foreign lands where we may not have friends? Can it provide that capability?
No, it cannot.
Okay, thank you. And General Smith, rifles were invented a long time. I just got a Mississippi rifle given to me for my retirement. But it is a percussion cap, .58 caliber rifle ball that you can load 2 times in 3 minutes. That is 19th century technology. Would you agree the firearms that we have today are not 15th or 16th century capabilities?
Yes, sir. Our M16s are quite modern.
Yeah, I mean, they're lighter, they fire at a rapid rate of fire, you have machine guns and all those things. To your knowledge, can drones by themselves replace Marines and make moral or quick decisions that all the data is not in for on a battlefield, the same that a Marine rifleman can?
No, sir. The individual rifleman and the mind thereof is faster than any computing model.
And I'm all about drones. I believe we need those too, and I believe they're cheap and they're capable, and we've seen that, and we need to use that technology. But it does not replace a thinking individual on the ground who can make decisions that maybe is not in the database. Is that correct?
Sir, that is correct. Only a Marine with a thinking mind can make a moral decision.
And I think that applies to sailors too, Admiral. I know it probably doesn't to Army guys, though, because we're not quite as smart. I do want to thank Mr. Garamendi and Senator Kelly and Senator Young for the SHIPS Act. Secretary Phelan, I met in your office, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the fresh business side that you're bringing to our shipbuilding industry and to our maritime industry as a whole. I hope that we will continue on that path to look ways to more rapidly build ships, to use automated technology or unmanned systems to replace people where we can. I don't think that means replacing all people. But what other ideas do you have to increase the ability other than, and all three of y'all, we have to get a consistent demand signal from the Navy and the Marine Corps of what we need. And the Marine Corps is pretty good. I know how many amphibs you need and LSVs. But we need to be consistent with industry because they cannot continue to adjust. When we say, oh, we want 4 destroyers, no, we just really want 0. No, we want 1. We've got to be consistent. Are y'all committed to give us a consistent demand of what ships we need built?
Hey, sir, I'll start. For the Navy, we want to produce a Navy that we can man, train, and equip and use effectively. And so with the given budget constraints, I'm going to recommend to the Secretary that that's what we buy. To the extent I can do that with consistency, I exactly and agree with you wholeheartedly. And I understand the impact and the demand signal on industry, but I feel a commitment to the Secretary to make sure we're manned, trained, and equipped. Those are the readiness accounts, and the Secretary referred to that I want to make sure are solvent so we can employ the Navy the way we want to do. So there's a little bit of a push-pull there. I'm not trying to be cute with you. I am trying to say we need a bigger Navy, and it needs to be manned, trained, and equipped to do what it needs to do.
And with that, I know we've spoken at length about this, so I won't delay that. Tell me, though, I think Congressman Moulton had a great point on where we do need to replace men and women with machines, especially in hostile environments. In what way can we use USVs or all the unmanned systems, whether subsurface, on the surface, or drones in the air? In what ways can we use those to complement our Marines and Navy across the world? What plans do we have to use as many unmanned systems as we can?
Well, I'll start with that. I answered that question. It's non-traditional sea denial, specifically focused for Admiral Paparo and Admiral Kaler in the near term. But they don't replace the legacy platforms we need. It's a combination. And we need to work with the Secretary on a vision for a hybrid fleet, which has both of those moving forward, but I'll yield to the Commandant.
Yes, sir. We're exercising and practicing with some big wing drones, our MQ-9s, our other drone technologies, but they are complementary of the manned fleet. They're complementary of our F-35s. They're a loyal wingman. They don't replace a manned aircraft.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, before we move on from this, Mr. Kelly was asking an important question, and I've stated in here repeatedly, and I can't emphasize this enough, budget can't drive policy. Policy has to drive budget. When General Kelly asks you about the numbers you need to tell us what the numbers you need to meet the threat. And if the budget will only allow you to achieve part of that number, then tell us that and put the balance in your unfunded requirements list. It is our job to find you the money. It is your job to define what you need to meet the threat. And I just really am frustrated by the fact that presidents, both parties, give us budgets that show us what they would like to do, that it just informs us. It does not limit us. I know it limits you, but we still need you to tell us what you need. And I think that's what General Kelly was getting after in that question. So that, understand there's what's in the budget request, and then there's the UFR list. We look at that UFR list as being the balance of what you said you need. So I'm sorry to take that time, but I do want to drive that point home. Thank you. And with that, I'll recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating.
I would like to just, if you could, comment on another area of concern and competition that we have with China and with Russia in particular. And we have the opportunity to work more with our allies, particularly our European allies in this respect. And that's what's happening in the Arctic. You know, there's other programs outside the Navy, national science programs that have been cut that deal with, for instance, issues. The Office of Polar Programs is one, but they're dealing with a lot of the research issues that are necessary a component to us being competitive in these areas. So I want to ask, has the Navy undertaken those things that are, is it duplicative? Is the Navy getting that kind of research that it needs in the Arctic areas? What are we doing? How are we cooperating with our allies in this regard? And what competition do we have? I know it's an area more and more that we must stay competitive with. So I don't know which of you would like to address that.
Secretary, if I could, I'll start and yield to you. We are interested in the Arctic. We do every 2 years a exercise in the Arctic called ICEX, which is primarily focused on our undersea platforms, submarines in particular. But over the past, I would say 5 years, we've been pushing our strike groups farther north because we want to have that capability. So, and working finally with the Coast Guard and NAVSEA on the development of their cutter program. So I do think there's increased activity. I am concerned about it. We are pushing north to operate there more.
What do we have for assets? Really, only a couple, really.
Well, we're restricted. We are, sir, absolutely. But we're restricted, as you know, on times a year we can push up there. But we want to the extent we can push our strike groups up there and our amphibious readiness groups, we want to have that capability.
What does Russia have for assets? It's amazing. The disparity is a concern.
Yes, sir, concur.
So I think that's an area with everything else, but it's an increasing area of competition and interest because of the great reserves that are there, as well as some efforts by China and Russia in terms of navigation constraints in that area. And so I think it's, with everything else going on in the world, I think it's something we better pay attention to more. And I think you'll need help from us to do this. We're miserably behind in assets and the availability that we have to compete. So I want to raise that as a concern. But I want to point out what I think is a program that the Navy has and that I think can be a great model. I think it could be expanded within the Navy as a model, but I think it could be used in the other branches. We have in our area, working with the University of Massachusetts, a Marine and Undersea Technology Research Program that we work jointly. And I think it's a win-win situation. You're using a university. They actually constructed a curriculum for the Navy, in conjunction with the Navy, where they're training individuals and they're doing research at the same time. And they're concentrating in this instance mostly on unmanned, undersea, autonomous vehicles and everything. But they're learning the robotics, they're doing the research on all of these areas and combine it with ocean research at the same time. But what's actually happened is it's been a great funnel for personnel. The people that are studying here in these grants go in and they serve our country at the end of this so often. So I don't know how familiar you are with that, but how much are you working with universities? I think this program you have can really be transferable to the other branches as well. We have personnel needs, skilled personnel needs, and this is a way to do that. And get research at the same time. So maybe you could comment on what you have for conjunction, for what you're doing with universities and research and personnel, and how this kind of program can be duplicated or expanded.
Well, I think it's a great program. We also work with the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Texas. So those programs are super helpful, and I have no pushback on that and agree.
No, I was just wondering if that can be expanded. And I've looked at and had budget hearings with the other branches, and it seems the Navy is ahead of the other branches in utilizing this. So your experience has been, as I described it, one where the research is there, plus it's a portal to get some actually important personnel people as well. So,
yes, sir.
Well, thank you for your work. I hope that can be looked at and duplicated. I think it's really a win-win situation. I yield back.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. Admiral Kilby, the Navy's pilot shortfall is increasingly concentrated in high-skilled strike fighter and electronic attack pilots. Surveys show aviators want flexible contract terms and more merit-based retention bonuses. What are you doing to improve this issue, and have you seen any progress, and do you need any additional authorities from Congress?
Hey, sir, it's got our attention. It's had our attention for some time. It's not a new issue for us, but I think it's an issue we really have to keep in close control and understand and follow. I am seeing progress. I don't know that I need additional help from you. I do think special pays when we need that, and having the authority to give those special pays is an important tool in the tool bag to maintain and gain those folks to serve our country.
And staying with you, you have 23,000 fewer sailors than needed to man the fleet, and only 89% of the positions were filled as of March. Are you concerned at all with this readiness issue, and what is the Navy doing, not just to recruit, but to restructure how we think about crew models, contractor support, and training pipelines?
Well, I'll try to be brief here, sir. I am concerned about it. It's my number 2 concern behind shipbuilding and ship repair. I am optimistic in where we are with recruiting this year and where we frankly turned around since the mid of 2024. We saw a change in behavior in our structure, and we put a lot of emphasis on it to get after it. And we're in a reasonably good place. But to your point, 22,950 gaps at sea is a big deal. I think we'll be in a better place at the end of this year. I don't want to go back in the wrong direction of the history, though, where we reduce crew manning and we increase load on the crew. So we've made an adjustment over the last several years where we added 15,000 billets at sea so we can properly man the ships to do the work we have. So I don't want to back off that, and I want to manage it and recruit to make the Navy do what the nation needs it to do.
When you talk to sailors or squadron commanders, what are they telling you they need most?
Well, we're really hurting at the apprentice level now. Those are where the majority of our gaps at sea are. So it takes 9 months to get a recruit through boot camp and to a ship with no additional training. And we're just seeing a turn in that. When I testified, I think 2 months ago, I said the gaps at sea were 23,200. Now we're 22,950, and we're trending in the right direction. And I think we'll be at 18,000 at the end of this year if we stay on pace. So we just need to have the machine do what it needs to do to get sailors through that pipeline to ships to reduce those gaps.
Are you hearing much about pay and incentives or quality of life issues in the service that's driving individuals to leave, possibly?
I can't make that connection. I can tell you that quality of service has our full attention because we feel that we have to treat our sailors like world-class athletes to keep them in the Navy. So the Secretary's focused on barracks, I'm focused on barracks. I'm focused on Wi-Fi. I'm focused on paying people on time. I'm focused on creating an experience for them where they feel valued and do not want to leave.
Okay. Shifting to conventional prompt strike, Secretary Phelan and Admiral Kilby, you can chime in too. Could you all provide an update on the conventional prompt strike, and from your perspective, what could Congress provide to help get this capability to cross the finish line without cutting corners or overloading the industrial base?
Yeah, I'll start. We've had a couple of challenging tests with the Army. We just had a recently successful test. I'm optimistic about the program. We need the program. It has a place in there's a hole in our munitions skill set, below nuclear, where I think this is a critical capability for us. And we'll first field on the Zumwalt class destroyers and then ultimately on submarines. So I'm completely behind it.
Okay, Secretary, do you have anything to add?
No, I agree with everything you said.
Okay, I imagine one of the hardest parts about standing up a program like CPS is navigating the tension between urgency and risk tolerance. At this stage, what's the biggest challenge you're wrestling with internally, whether technical, cultural, or bureaucratically? What would make the biggest difference from our side of the house?
I will have to take that question for the record and get with Vice Admiral Wolf. I'm tracking it with him, and I don't know of a specific thing to give you, but I'll take the question for the record and come back to you, sir.
Fair enough. Thank you, gentlemen. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for your testimony, gentlemen. I'm going to pull a little bit on Representative Moulton's line of questioning, which regarded sort of the balance between lethality as defined by physicality and lethality as defined by modern warfare and modern technology. We all recognize, and I've been supportive of the fact that physical endurance and combat readiness are foundational to the military, and that people should adhere to the standards that we have formed for them, regardless of who they are. Today's battlefield, however, increasingly requires new forms of expertise that Mr. Moulton mentioned a few of, including cyber operations and drone piloting and advanced data analysis. So the traditional view of lethality has certainly evolved. That traditional view of being physical strength and kinetic capability has to expand, in my opinion, to include technological proficiency and cognitive dominance as well. So in this conversation that we've collectively been having about the importance of lethality, which again I support wholeheartedly, how would you think, or do you think, about the evolution of the definition of lethality is for the individual troop? And can you please define what you think modern lethality is? And I'll ask General Smith to talk about that first.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for that question. So every Marine is a rifleman. So when it comes down to it, it ultimately comes down to one Marine versus an adversary. After all the drones are expended, after all the artillery rounds are fired and all the ordnance is expended off of our aircraft, it comes down to one rifleman looking down the rifle sights at another rifleman. And that is who we are as a Marine Corps. That's fundamental to who we are.
So even now in a modern warfare environment where we're talking about drones on drones, you would boil it down to the rifle.
I would, ma'am. Every Marine is a rifleman. That's our ethos. It's fundamental to who we are. It doesn't mean that we don't prioritize drones, because we used to shoot a few thousand meters. Now we're shooting tens of thousands.
Understood, understood.
But it's an ethos.
And so as long as that person is capable of being an effective rifle person, you believe that they are lethal?
They are. As long as they can hit their target at 500 meters with iron sights, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Admiral, any comments on what modern lethality is defined as?
Yes, ma'am, thanks for the question. A couple things a little bit different. The Navy is a little bit different than Marine Corps in this regard. We're a highly technical service where sailors are trained to do specific things. So I'd say at a base level, just like the Marine Corps, we want to optimize human performance. That means sleep, understanding where they're at, care for them, all that. 3 bags full. We need to do even better at that as far as making sure leaders are engaged with their troops and understand where they are from a wellness perspective. So I'm all over that. Break. The next piece is that all those individual sailors are trained, current, and proficient in their task. That task can be many things. I could be shooting a Tomahawk. I could be defending the ship with a Standard missile. I could be a quartermaster taking a fix. I could be a CS preparing meals. Optimizing their performance in that regard is what I consider lethality.
Yeah, I 100% agree. You know, the person, when I served active duty, my job was to make sure I helped design what amounts to Iron Dome at this point in time. And I was lethal because I was able to be effective in doing that job. And so we each have a different job. And what I would argue lethality is, as much as anything, is making sure that we are optimized as a force, that we are individually doing the thing that we were tasked to do. And I think that's one of the places where we get ourselves caught up on the physicality of things is not always what makes us the most lethal as a body and as a force. I'm going to move on in what remains of my questions. The last question that I have for you has to do with barracks. I'm on the military personnel subcommittee, the ranking member, and also was the ranking member on the quality of life committee. You talked appropriately about the importance of your barracks initiative. The Army, unfortunately, has diverted $1 billion of resources that were supposed to be allocated for barracks to the southern border. Would you please commit to me that you are not planning on doing that with any of the moves that you are doing to the Los Angeles area with your Marines?
Yes, ma'am. I'm committed to improving the quality of life of our Marines. I'm committed to spending every dollar that's appropriated to us for the purpose for which it was appropriated, and that includes Barracks 2030, which is our most consequential barracks investment in our history.
Thank you. And since I have 20 seconds left, can you tell me what happened with the airplanes falling off the ships and whether or not heads rolled as a result?
Ma'am, there are 4 investigations ongoing on the Truman Strike Group right now. None of those are released. I'm committed to letting that process happen and conducting actions as appropriate, and then reporting back to the committee when those are complete.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska, General Bacon.
Thank you to all three of you being here. Thank you for your leadership. I appreciate you being here today. My first question is to Admiral Kirby and General Smith. What is the #1 capability that you're lacking right now for a fight with China, which is our pacing threat? What's the gaps that this committee here can help fill? Admiral Kirby.
I'd say munitions are the thing that, in the top 3 that bother me, ship repair and shipbuilding. Those are things that Secretary and I are after to improve. I don't know that I need more help from you in that regard. Recruiting and manning, that's the second thing. I think we're on pace to do that. I don't think I can get more help from you. But munitions, we have to turn the tide here if we're going to be in protraction. So preferred munition production, as well as second-tier and third-tier vendors that may be able to compete in that space that we haven't been open to in the past. I think we ought to be open to that consideration and get help from you if needed to do so.
I think that's good insight because we see in Ukraine, they're burning munitions faster than anybody can build them. General Smith.
Yeah, I would concur with my shipmate, Admiral Kilby. Munitions are key. And for us, mobility is key. You know, we have to get to the fight, we have to be able to maneuver in the fight, and we have to be able to strike at range. So advanced long-range weapon systems are key to us.
Thank you. Admiral Kirby, Ukraine attained sea supremacy in the Black Sea without really a Navy. What are the lessons learned for the U.S. Navy?
Well, it's a different, a little bit of a different, there are lessons to be learned there, and I think the commitment to get to a hybrid fleet and learning to use unmanned more effectively is a path we're on. We're in a little bit of a different place because we're not, now, we will, Homeland Defense is our #1 thing, but where I tend to think of our Navy deployed forward to bring effects to bear, I've got a sustainment piece, an employment piece, a deployment piece for those vehicles. So I do want to learn those lessons, and we're applying them in the context of non-traditional sea denial that I explained earlier. I do think there's a coupling of traditional assets, manned planes and unmanned aircraft, manned ships and unmanned ships that we need to explore and really diversify our fleet to have it be capable.
Yeah, it's worth thinking through because the nature of the fight is changing. Secretary Phelan, there was a bad report on Naval Air Station Key West. How focused is the Navy Department on ensuring we have good family housing?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. So I have ordered the Navy to review all of our barracks after what I saw at Guam, which was appalling to me. Those sailors and Marines have been moved out of the building they were in and put into a new building, new barracks that was built. So we're in the middle of that review. I'm waiting to get the results of that. And then I will be going out to Key West as well to look at that. The Marines beat the Navy to the punch on this and have been reviewing barracks, I think, for about the last year or two, and are in the middle of modernizing those. I saw some at Camp Lejeune that are getting updated because some of the ones they're in are also not really good, and that needs to change. So I look forward to sharing that with the committee as soon as I get that report done. And to your prior question on ways, on munitions and ways you could help, one thing I would also say is we are going to have to, in our contracting, own our IP. We pay for a lot of our IP, and we get hung up by the big primes saying, well, we need to fix it because we own the IP, or we're not going to give you that IP.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't, and we need to really change that.
If I may follow up, the GAO gave us a failing score in barracks, all the departments on barracks and dormitories. We had a report a couple of weeks ago saying that Secretary of Defense had moved out about $1 billion out of barracks into other needs. But yeah, we got a failing grade in dorms, and you just touched on Guam and some other places. Have you seen money being moved out of the Navy's accounts to support dormitories or barracks?
I have not.
Okay.
No, sir. We're still fully committed to Barracks 2030.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you. Just let you know we got our eyes on it, even though there's mixed feedback I'm getting. I wanted to ask you a question on the Slickum briefly. I think it provides us a lot of options. How are we doing with the Slickum N deployment or production?
So we're committed to Slickum N. I think we had some questions in other hearings about platforms, which platforms. I think initially my opinion is a submarine is the initial platform to deliver that, and we're committed to the program to deliver it on the schedule of 2034. There may be some options to look at some interim capability, and we look forward to exploring those as well.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back my minus 5 seconds.
Gentleman yields back, Chair, and I recognize Mr. Golden of Maine.
Thank you. Admiral Kilby, you've consistently testified before the committee about the Flight 3 DDG delivering capabilities of important need to the fleet, specifically the radar, which is going to be key to anti-air and ballistic missile defense. One assumes this remains a high priority in places like the Red Sea, Persian Gulf, or South China Sea. Do you agree with that?
I agree completely, sir.
And the Navy's shipbuilding plan envisions 23 Flight 3 ships. You currently have one in the fleet, correct?
Well, yes, sir. One is about ready to deliver.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, the pending reconciliation bill includes 2 DDG Flight 3s. Congressional intent was pretty clear that these would result in a 3-ship cadence in FY26 and FY27. I'm now hearing behind the scenes that the plan that we don't have yet, complete plan from you, is going to goose egg the DDG program in your request for FY26. So I've been on the committee for 6 years, and I've heard from the Navy consistently a desire that the 2 DDG yards achieve a 1.5 ship per year rate of production. But here you're signaling demand that would not support that rate of production. So do you envision paying these yards to build ships? Or, I'm sorry, I'll rephrase that, to not build ships? Or do you expect these yards to achieve a 1.5 ship production rate only to then turn around and lay shipbuilders off?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Look, the President and I are committed to national defense and are committed to shipbuilding. As it relates to the budget, look, we are working very closely with the OSD and the OMB on this as we speak, basically daily. And so we have a good idea of what we need and don't need, and that is. And I don't want to get in front of the President on that, and I know he'll be coming out with a budget soon, but I think shipbuilding will fare quite well in that budget.
Shipbuilding, yes, but I'm talking about destroyers.
Yeah, I can't go into specifics with you right now, Congressman, but I understand the question. I think, we are at the end of line on the current destroyers and looking at DDGX. As I said before, we're looking at the whole force and trying to understand what the whole force posture should be in terms of what we're learning and what's going on and how we should be structured in effect. And destroyers are an important component of that.
Yes. Across the country we have skilled shipbuilders, but they are aging. And every yard is trying to bring in new shipbuilders to train them up to have the skills that they need to build the best, most quality, most lethal Navy that this country needs. On this committee, we have found through studies, which we partnered with the Navy to do, that it takes on average 7 years to develop a high asset, fully skilled Navy shipbuilder. So this rate, the signal, the consistency of the signal demand from the Navy, and then to actually deliver on acquiring at that rate is key to not only developing that workforce, taking 7 years to get them there, maintaining them. And you cannot build a future DDGX without shipbuilders.
I agree with you, and I have more ships than our shipyards can handle for the next 10 years, whether it's a destroyer, whether it's a tanker, whether it's an oiler, whether it's a submarine. So I am not worried about the demand signal we have. It is getting those workers and getting them trained it is there, and I think it's incenting the private sector to help us as well. So this is as I said, it's really going to be a whole of government approach. I think the demand signal, as Congressman Courtney mentioned, which we recently did.
I hear it. What I'm speaking to is a consistent concern that has been raised that these 2 yards get to a 1.5 ship per year production rate when you're not actually then demanding that rate, which will inevitably lead to ups and downs, to bathtubs in the workforce where you are hiring people, training people, and then laying people off. What we are asking for is simply consistency. And it's just as important as how big the Navy you want to have and how quickly you want to get there. You're not going to maintain the best shipbuilders in the world if they don't think it's a consistent career, and you need their skills and assets. And I would ask for you to give that some deep thought.
Gentleman's time's expired, Chair. I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the witnesses for coming today. Secretary, I think we're all elated and relieved that there has been in the news of the turnaround with recruiting. What I'd love to ask is, can you talk a little bit about the targeted goal and where we're at and compare that to last year? And then more importantly, drill down to the foundational reasons why there has been a turnaround. And you may not know exactly that right yet, but was it messaging and advertising? Was it changes in the recruiting approach? Was it changes at the top, in the chain of command? Was it increased access? And then if you could do a deep dive and come back and share with us, because whatever we're doing right, I want to learn the lessons from that and keep doing it.
I'll let Admiral Kilby give you the specific numbers as to where we sit there. My view is I think that we are repositioning our branding. I think the Marines do an excellent job in terms of branding and recruiting.
They were the only ones that always hit their goals.
That is correct. And so we have begun, and I think there's a reason why. They put some of their best officers in recruiting jobs. So they've made it a priority and made it important. That is something we are looking to do with the Navy as well, which is prioritizing recruiting, making it more important, saying this is critical. I think one of the reasons we've gotten the bump, to be honest, is I think the president's election definitely brought a pop, and we've seen a pop in the numbers. And I think that I can't take you through that math.
Sure, but I'd just like to have a deep dive to know, because I want to be getting in doubts and uncertainties. Whatever the reasons for the recruiting and the success, we just need to keep doing it, or make us aware of it and the public as well. Admiral?
Yeah, we'll generate a report and send it to you, sir. I do think it is a large number of factors, and I welcome all of them to do what we need to do to bring the folks in the Navy. We did have a change in leadership. We elevated the position of the recruiting command commander. We changed our daily and visual management to look at it every day. We took away monthly goals and said, just bring in everyone you can. We were more thoughtful about medical waivers. We were being very conservative to not bring someone in who might have a problem, and we made a judgment call based on that desire to serve and the fact that we could take care of those sailors. So I think there's a ton of things that happen there. But I'm focused on it every day, not every month.
Well, great, because it was all hands on deck, and that's what we needed. And you want to talk about any kind of weapon systems, we don't have human beings to operate them. They're worthless. And on that note, Admiral, is there any specific shortfalls as far as in, let's say, cyber medical subs that you're still experiencing?
Yeah, there are some areas we're challenged on. Medical people is a challenge for us. And there's a few other areas. I think we're actually in a pretty good shape for nuclear sailors to come in, both officer and enlisted. That's an area we've been challenged before. So I can get back to you on the specifics.
Could you, and how about with cyber? How are we doing with
cyber? Cyber from a recruitment or a training perspective, sir?
Both.
Okay, for recruitment, I think we're okay. It's an exciting mission and people feel fulfilled when they come to it. Meeting the demands of the cyber comm as far as training offensive and defensive teams, we're good defense. We got some work to do on offense.
Awesome, thank you. In general, I wanted to talk to you about, it's clear that the biggest threat we have is, peer adversary, China, Indo-Pacific. And, you know, when I look at Okinawa, and we had 19,000 Marines in Okinawa, and then there's a plan in place and that's commencing that to reduce that to 10. And it would make sense to me, considering sitting on this committee and also on the Intel committee, to do everything we can to keep those Marines on Okinawa and not only not be decreasing the number, but increasing that number, considering the threat that's there, and we all think about and talk about Taiwan. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and what can we do? I, in general, would love to have a meeting and do whatever we can do on this committee, being the chair, the subcommittee chair on military personnel, to help mitigate whatever political things we'd have to talk about with our Japanese allies and partners. But I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Well, Congressman, what I would say is President Trump and Prime Minister Shiba confirmed the vital importance of the steady implementation of the realignment of U.S. forces in Japan at their February summit. I agree with Admiral Paparo that currently Marine Corps forces in the First Island chain are optimized, and that my best military advice is that any change to that optimized laydown increases risk. Again, we are currently optimized as we stand now, and any change to that optimization increases risk to the O-plans and increases risk to the combatant commander.
Gentleman's time's expired, Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Admiral Kirby, General Smith, Secretary Phelan, thank you for being here. I represent San Diego, so I look forward to this hearing every year. Obviously, the Marines and Navy are integral to my community, and I wish that I was able to spend my 5 minutes asking you about childcare and housing and shipbuilding and how we could make our Navy and Marine Corps everything we need for the war of the future. But unfortunately, because of President Trump's deployment of 700 active duty Marines into Los Angeles over the objections of local officials, I will be asking about that instead. So General Smith, first, I'd like to ask you about training. I know it's never standard practice to train Marines in crowd control and non-lethal engagement. I've spoken to folks at OneMEF. I saw your testimony yesterday for the Senate Armed Services Committee, in which you said that all 700 Marines currently deployed to Los Angeles have received training or are currently being trained in de-escalation, crowd control, and less than lethal means. I received a response to a request for information from the Marines yesterday that said that only a portion of the battalion has completed this training and the remainder will be fully trained shortly. Will any Marine be allowed near civilians in Los Angeles before completing the full course of this training?
No, ma'am.
Excellent. Good to hear. Precisely how many hours of formal instruction has each Marine already received on crowd control and less than lethal tactics?
They've received 4 days worth of training.
Yesterday you said more than 2 hours, but you'd get back with specifics. Now you can say precisely 4 days?
4 days.
Okay, good to know. Within the last hour, CNN has begun reporting that, quote, the 700 Marines mobilized to the LA area on Monday night are still undergoing training as of Wednesday morning, and it is not yet clear when they will be employed onto the streets to help with protests, end quote, according to the U.S. Northern Command spokesperson. And yet yesterday, the Secretary of Defense was in front of the House Appropriations Committee where he told that committee that as far as training, all of the units on the ground had been fully trained in their capabilities of what they're executing on the ground. Should this committee believe your statements today and the Northcom spokesperson, or the Secretary of Defense's testimony in front of the Appropriations Committee?
Well, ma'am, Marines are always training. Every time there's a down moment, we're rehearsing, we're training. So training to deploy has been completed, but they are going to continue to train. Again, every time there's a break in anything, there's a break in the action, so to speak, Marines are training. We train constantly.
Sure, but the training for non-lethal and de-escalation and force, what they're doing in LA is very different from what you normally train for. So I'm not sure the training is exactly the same. Well, at least I hope it's not.
It is different, but it can still be repeated and it can still be drilled.
Okay. And it was clear from conversations that I've had with the Marines and from your answers yesterday to the Senate that the Marines in LA have not been explicitly tasked with law enforcement, which is good because under the law that would be illegal. However, with the evolving dynamics in Los Angeles, I'm concerned that the Marines on the ground who are young could be put in compromising situations due to posse comitatus. So if someone on the ground with DHS or other law enforcement asks a Marine to do something that they cannot do according to the law, how are they meant to address that?
Well, ma'am, they have leaders with them. They have staff non-commissioned officers and officers who will ensure that they don't violate the Posse Comitatus Act.
Okay. And will you commit to making the standing rules for the use of force that they are operating under public?
Yes, ma'am. The SRUF, the standing rules for the use of force, are currently public.
Okay. We have been unable to get a public copy of them, so I appreciate your help in making sure we can further publicize these public rules.
Yes, ma'am.
So look, I recognize that the Marine Corps is just following an order, and that's your job, but I find it unacceptable that the Pentagon took control of the National Guard and sent active duty Marines to Los Angeles when the relevant offices in California expressed that their deployment was unnecessary, including the Los Angeles Police Department, who are not, leftists, who said that deploying Marines was unnecessary and could make it more difficult for them to do their job. The Pentagon and President Trump are escalating the situation drastically by unnecessarily deploying troops and causing more chaos. And frankly, our community, our National Guard, and our Marines deserve better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you. It's unfortunate that the mayor of Los Angeles and the governor of New York, of California didn't do their job to protect their city, and that your men and women were called upon to do that. Mr. Secretary, would it surprise you to say if I told you that the Chinese hold a 250-to-1 advantage in shipbuilding right now, large ships over the United States?
No, sir, it would not.
And so how long would it take for us to increase our capacity by 25,000%?
I'm not sure you and I will be alive when we got to that.
I agree. Okay. And so do we have any idea of the plans for the PLA Navy? I mean, how many ships, how big is their Navy going to be?
Sir, it's hard to say. Our ships are far superior to their ships. That's a game we've been playing for a long time. I think the Chinese strategy is to overwhelm with numbers. We are a much better force. We are much better trained sailors and Marines. So I think it's what we pick and what we have. You could argue to some extent that the more they build, given the speed at which technology and what we've seen in some of these other conflicts, that could at some point become a disadvantage. However, we are too far behind, and I think there's a stat that I've used. The Chinese build more ships in a year than we have since World War II.
I agree.
Okay.
I mean, we won World War II with, what, a 6-to-1 advantage on shipbuilding, 6 aircraft carriers for every one that the Japanese built, and we won the Second World War with that. And so they have a 250-ship advantage. Look, if I asked you 3 weeks ago, hey, I want to destroy like 1/3 of the Soviet bomber force, and your answer probably would have been, well, I think we need some long-range bombers, we need some long-range weapons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because that's, and yet, what, about a week ago, 1/3 of their bomber fleet was actually destroyed by drones, and a different way to engage the Soviet, or not the Soviets, but the Russians. So I think the same holds true for the Navy. So if I probably ask you right now, hey, I want to sink Chinese ships, the Admiral, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I think you would say, well, we need more submarines, et cetera, conventional weapons and all that. But I'd like for you to start thinking outside the box. Because for every ship that the Chinese built, I want 1,000 different ways to sink it. Not 1 or 2 or 5. I want 1,000 different ways to sink it. And then good luck trying to stop 1,000 different things that are going to sink you. And so, Mr. Secretary, do you have a group of people that just completely think out of the box? Or do you have a way to access a group of people that are not stuck in paradigms and that completely think that, you say, I want to sink a ship, and they were going to give you 1,000 different ways to sink a ship that doesn't have an aircraft carrier, doesn't have a destroyer, doesn't have a submarine. Do you have access to that? Do you have a group like that?
Congressman, we're putting one together. I would say stay tuned. I've gotten a few briefs already that have been enlightening, and I would tell you, our capabilities are quite formidable. I think they should keep our our adversaries at pace. But as I said, they are catching us at an accelerating rate. We do need to pivot. We do have that access. We are putting that together and putting together carefully very good teams. And that is why I'm saying the whole force posture that we're looking at, the way we are going to fight is going to change. And so I look forward to sharing that with you.
I agree, because I don't really want to fight their fight. I mean, on a production scale, they could outproduce us, so I want to fight them a different way, all right? And so, I think the Poles still had cavalry back in 1939, right? They somehow thought it was a really good idea to face the Germans with cavalry, and I thought they got, okay, well, it might have been great, in the 19th century, but cavalry in the 20th century just didn't work. And so maybe in the 21st century, our force structure, their force structure may not be the way that, the future of warfare is coming. And I can see that, coming pretty quickly, and we as a nation need to pivot to a new way. And I hope that you'd get more than 2% into automated systems that you have right now in the budget. And my time's up, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair Line recognizes the gentlelady from New Hampshire, Ms. Goodlander.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Secretary, I want to begin with you and thank you for visiting the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard right at the beginning of your tenure. You were there back in April, and I was very encouraged to hear from you, and I appreciate you too, Admiral, prioritizing what we need to do for our public shipyards. The Portsmouth Naval Shipyard is America's oldest public shipyard, and the men and women who work there have really hard and important jobs, and I appreciate what you've said about the need to support our shipyard workers. We also need to hire more shipyard workers, as you've both testified. And at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, we've got to hire 550 workers a year. I was encouraged, Mr. Secretary, that when you visited back in April, you announced that 150 personnel have received initial job offers. I wanted to ask you, as far as we know, no one has actually been hired since then. And we want to support you in clearing the way of any red tape or bureaucratic process that is preventing shipyard workers from being hired. So could you give us a status update?
I'll have to take that one for the record and come back to you. Congresswoman, I don't have those numbers with me right now.
Well, would very much appreciate an update on the status, and we'll submit questions that go directly to any bureaucratic hurdles that you're facing at OMB or OPM. I also just want to point out what you've said about supporting our workers is really important. They're facing a real attack because of the president's executive order that seeks to really strip away fundamental rights of our unionized shipyard workers and federal employees across the board. One of my real concerns about H.R. 1, the GOP budget bill, is the elimination of the federal employee retirement system, the FERS annuity supplement, which is really so critical to helping federal employees who retire before the age of 62. It's bad policy, and it's hurting our shipyard workers and really federal workers across the board. And I want to just point that out. Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you for what you've committed to doing with respect to the audit. This is incredibly important. I will submit questions to you about what specific barriers you face in achieving a clean audit, which is so essential to public trust and to any functioning organization. And I also want to thank you for your commitment to the right to repair, and for your candor in assessing the situation as it is, that this is just simply nonsense and an outrage that we can't fix our own equipment. And I look forward to hearing what steps you're concretely taking to ensure that we fix the way that we do contracts, and we empower the Navy to repair its own and maintain its own equipment. General, I want to pick up on my colleague's line of questioning and ask you, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit to the record an article from the Associated Press yesterday entitled "Pentagon Draws Up Rules on Possible Use of Force by Marines Deployed to LA Protests."
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. General, can you please clarify what rules, the President's executive order do not specify what rules apply to any Marines who have been deployed to Los Angeles or who will be deployed domestically in the future. What rules apply and when were those rules written? Because according to this article, quote, the Pentagon was scrambling just this week on Monday to establish rules to guide U.S. Marines who could be faced with the rare and difficult prospect of using force against citizens on American soil.
Ma'am, we're using the standing rules for the use of force, or SRUF. These rules emphasize de-escalation, use of non-lethal force, and the inherent right of self-defense for Marines and others. So SRUF, standing rules for the use of force.
And General, you commit to providing this committee with a complete copy of the rules that are being distributed right now?
Yes, ma'am.
And when were those rules developed? Were they revised at all?
I don't believe they were revised, ma'am.
So it's always been clear from your perspective what rules apply, and it's the rules you just mentioned.
Yes, ma'am. These are rules that we would use in any number of situations. Marines have training in crowd control, and they have these rules for embassy reinforcement. They have these rules for non-lethal situations, and they're trained to them.
Thank you, General. And the 4 days of training, who is responsible for this training and where is it being conducted?
Ma'am, I am responsible for it, and the local commanders are responsible for it. It's being conducted at home station.
Gentlelady's
where they're
time's
deployed.
expired. Chair, I recognize the gentlelady from South Carolina, Ms. Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing before us today. South Carolina's Low Country has a long history as a maritime hub and commercial shipping channel, and it continues to play a critical role in sustaining our Navy's mission, supporting ship repair, logistics, and a skilled maritime workforce. Beaufort County is home to Parris Island and the Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort. We're enormously proud that we make Marines. For more than a century, Parris Island has been making Marines. At MCAS Beaufort, aviators gain the skills and resilience necessary to operate in the most challenging, contested environments across the globe while maintaining a high state of readiness to deploy in support of Marine Corps operations worldwide. Today, I look forward to discussing how we can build upon this strong foundation with sustained investment in infrastructure, expanded training capacities, and integration of cutting-edge technologies. The Low Country has the potential to play an even greater role in our national defense. So, General Smith, I have a few questions for you. I'll start with you this morning. The Marine Corps is undergoing one of the most significant transformations in its history as we modernize for the future of conflict. We must ensure the Corps' training continues to produce the most lethal force in the world. So, General Smith, are the key tenets of force design reshaping the Marine Corps view on the recruit training taking place at Parris Island?
Yes, ma'am. Our recruit training hasn't changed.
And what role will basic training play in building Marines capable of contested environment operations?
Ma'am, basic training is designed to produce a basically trained Marine who will then go on to his or her specialty. So again, our basic training, even though we're doing force design, our basic training remains unchanged. It is the standard by which we train a Marine.
And are we using Parris Island currently to train for advanced small unit amphibious tactics?
Ma'am, we are not.
Okay, are there any plans to, is this a feasible location, I guess, for this kind of training? Would it be a feasible location?
Ma'am, I think it would be. It would be a matter of capacity, moving from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, which is where most of our assets reside, and most of our infantry Marines reside.
Okay, and as the Marine Corps considers manned, unmanned teaming, are there any plans to conduct any of this kind of training at MCAS Beaufort?
Ma'am, there is a little bit of discussion about using unmanned systems at Beaufort. Some of our big wing drones, our MQ-9s, et cetera. So we will continue to evaluate whether it is feasible to support that at MCAS Beaufort.
What would you need to be supported there?
We would frankly need infrastructure. We'd need base housing. We would need the ability for our hangars to house multiple types of aircraft, et cetera.
I was going to ask, do they have enough hangars there, hangar space?
No, ma'am, they do not.
Not yet?
They do not.
Okay. How is the Marine Corps leveraging virtual training to prepare aviators for real-world conditions?
Ma'am, I just was down at Pensacola. In fact, we are leveraging it such that an individual student can go into use goggles and use a virtual T-38 and train themselves, basically. They've got original training, but they can repeat and they can practice as many times as they want to accelerate their syllabus. And once you're trained and you pass the syllabus, then you move on. And we've seen that it is cutting through, or just cutting down on the glut and the backlog of.
So you see an advantage to using the
absolutely.
technology and training Marines
Yes, ma'am. We're using
more
that across
effectively.
the board. We're using that in our ACV, our amphibious combat vehicle. We're using that at flight school, and that is naval aviation.
I've crashed a few planes on one of those simulators. It's not easy.
Ma'am, it's very realistic.
Yeah. But back to a question about infrastructure investments and MCAS Beaufort. What infrastructure investments is the Marine Corps prioritizing to ensure MCAS Beaufort can continue to fulfill its mission?
Ma'am, frankly, what we need is hangar space, and we need our maintenance facilities. That is the key. If it's going to house Marine Corps aircraft, we have to have hangar space to protect those aircraft from storms, and we have to have maintenance space.
Do you know roughly the amount of investment or money that's needed to continue the mission?
Ma'am, I don't. I'll have to get that and take it for the
I
record.
would love to. I've been down there, and I've been in some of the hangars, and I've seen it multiple times. So would love that information if your office can provide that to us. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back, and thank you very much, General.
Thank you, ma'am.
The gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Cisneros.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Secretary Fallon, John Paul Jones, the father of the Navy, wrote, "It is by no means enough that the officer of the Navy should be a capable mariner. He must be of that course, but also a great deal more. He should also be as well a gentleman of liberal education, refined manners, punctuous courtesy, and the nicest sense of personal honor." By liberal education, he means a sense, right? Literature, sciences, mathematics. It's even inscribed on the walls at the Naval Academy. But yet, the Navy's removed 400 books from the Naval Academy. They've stopped, groups of students that would come together to study for each other that focused on engineering and other things. How are we living up to this motto here if we're removing books? Do we not want our officers to be well-read?
Congressman, thank you for the question. So currently there is a panel that OSD has convened that is assessing books across all military installations. Therefore, I defer on this topic to them. Currently at the Naval Academy, I think, and at two other Nova postgraduate in the War College, I think we're talking about low double-digit books numbers. So I think you're...
400 seems like a pretty significant number from the Naval Academy.
I believe that number is no longer accurate, and that was a media invented number.
So we're talking double, like no more than 99 books.
I'm talking like 15 to 20, is that right, Admiral?
15 to 20.
21 at the Naval Academy.
All right. Can we see that list, if I could?
The panel is working on it, so as soon as we get that study, I'll be happy to share that with you.
All right. I'd like to see that book. All right, or that list. Admiral Kilby, does the Navy need a next-generation fighter?
In my opinion, we do.
All right. The administration's proposing gutting the next-generation fighter, and that was something that just kind of came out pretty recently, as in the last couple days, from their proposed budget. And it's a program that I repeatedly heard from uniform officials that they need. So how do you reconcile this? How are you moving forward to kind of ensure that we are going to have the research funds in order to ensure that we can move forward with a next-generation fighter?
So, thank you for that, Congressman. Look, I think as it comes to next-gen fighters, as I said before, we're looking at the full composition of the air wing of the future. And so we have to focus on the capabilities and technologies for years to come that are going to win. And that includes manned and unmanned platforms that we have to look at. I do not have a lot of confidence. All of our programs are in trouble. We have a number of companies that are not performing. We've got to get those done. So I think looking at this system, 6th Gen is important, and I know it's important to the Admiral, and he should always give you his best military advice. I think we're looking at the whole panacea of what we've got, and then how we can, what makes the most sense to use in the future. And so I think we have to get more confidence in the base. This is a system that, as I said in my opening statement about readiness means like ready, like today and then in the future. And how is that future changing, and how do we think about that? And so we're looking at it, evaluating it, and trying to make sure that we're not back here in 2 years saying, we told you it was going to cost X, it's actually going to be X plus 50, and by the way, it's going to be late. So that's really what we're trying to do.
Well, look, I think the Navy has a bigger challenge than anybody else with the high expensive cost of the items, right? Everything from ships to fighters to the missiles and everything that they need, the weapons. And trying to balance that all is definitely a challenge. But we need to ensure, right, that we continue to move forward, as you said, right, readiness today, but also to develop for the future. And that is something that I am willing to work with you there. Whatever we can do to help support that mission, right? We want to ensure that we can do the fight today, but also prepare for the future. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Luttrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, gentlemen. The Department of the Navy is currently spending tens of millions of taxpayer dollars per year to develop custom-built software on top of proprietary low-code platforms for its electronic procurement systems, or EPS. However, in 2024, Naval technical review of EPS cited delays, platform immaturity, outdated architecture, and limited functionality after a decade of the program's development. Secretary Phelan, given the administration's focus on integrating commercial solutions to achieve greater efficiency, why is the department not, or is it competing this program for a more innovative, scalable, and cost-efficient off-the-shelf solution?
We're reviewing all of our IT systems and all of our systems, and we've canceled some already. So Navy HR, which had a bunch of redundancy that was not working, and we had a contractor who could not fulfill the obligation. So I don't have that specific one, Congressman. I'll come back to you on it. But all of them are being reviewed. All of those contracts are being reviewed to remove redundancies. And if they're not working, we're going to get rid of them. I can tell you, as someone who I get for me just to send a 3-sentence email from my office takes almost like a minute. That's how bad the systems are. That's just in the Pentagon. So we need to update our systems. We need to analyze all of these. That is going on, and we're working very hard on it. But I don't have an answer for you on that specific.
Yes, sir. I understand that redundancy. I mean, it's almost, you can't even say the word government without having the word redundancy built in on top of it. Are you looking at both private and government? I understand, okay, as a former military man, I know that, hey, we want to do everything ourselves, but there comes a point in time where we might need to lean into the commercial space in order to help us do that?
We should get out of the IT development business. We're not good at it.
General Smith, you made an extremely valid point earlier when you were talking about drone technology and how your Marines are developing their own drones, because there's no more efficient and effective killer than the ones that are being shot at, and we are amazing at what we do. And Mr. Admiral Kilby, you got Naval Special Warfare inside of you doing the exact same thing. And the issue is we have outside entities trying to come into our organization to help, and we have an inside organization trying to get permissions to do what we do best. The chairman and the ranking member are doing the SPEED Act, and that's trying to clear the muddy water. I think the point that I'm trying to make is you've heard the leadership, they're leaning on you for those ideas. Because we're on this side more or less looking in to the operators, okay? Don't hesitate to ask and tell us what you need, okay? Because we're eyes wide open and the ears as well. With health and wellness inside our communities, you listed off your 3 priorities, both of you did, and I don't necessarily agree with the order, because I would put my sailors up top and I would put my Marines up top, be the first words out of my mouth. And I know we're focused in on that. And General Smith, I've got a fine young Marine that works in my office, and he speaks very highly of you. And that says a lot. And he says you're focusing in on your troops, which is amazing. As we move forward, the transition period from when an active service member jumps off that bullet train into the civilian space and becomes a veteran is unforgiving. There's really nothing on the outside to catch us. Mr. McGuire, can you lean to the right just a little bit, please? Thanks so much. There's really nothing on the outside to catch us when we leave. That bullet train continues down the track, and everybody that's someone that's looking forward, front sight focus, and everybody else is tucking and rolling. Here you go. And then the VA does their absolute best to receive us. I think there's a breakdown in communication from active duty and the hot handoff to the VA. And I'm probably pretty certain that you guys are concentrating on that, but we need to concentrate a lot harder, because my number one issue as a member of Congress is to get our veteran suicide rate from over 6,000 a year down to 0, okay? But I need your help. Fair enough?
Absolutely, sir.
Thank you.
Concur.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses here today. General Smith, it's good to see you. As a member of the Joint Chiefs, you serve as a military advisor to the Secretary of Defense and the President. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Were you involved in the decision to mobilize 700 Marines to the streets of Los Angeles?
Mr. Secretary or Congressman, I was not involved in the decision to mobilize, but I was involved in the decision of who to mobilize.
Thank you. Were these Marines that were deployed adequately trained to deal with these domestic events?
They have been trained before they deployed, yes, sir.
How long were they trained for?
They were trained for multiple hours.
Hours? Give me days?
Well, I would say over the course of a couple of days, they received multiple hours worth of training.
Is that adequate training?
That is, sir.
Do you think these Marines' time could be better spent back in 29 Palms, continuing to train and carry out their mission?
Well, sir, I'm compliant with all lawful guidance, so I won't get into, what they should or shouldn't be doing. But we were given lawful guidance to deploy that battalion, and that battalion has deployed.
Have there been discussions about mobilizing additional Marines to LA or other places throughout the country?
No, sir, not to my knowledge.
Thank you. If domestic mobilizations continue, do you think this will erode public trust in the reputation of the Marine Corps?
Sir, I think the Marines are going to conduct themselves with the same dignity and professionalism that they always conduct themselves with, and they will continue to bring credit to the Marine Corps regardless of the mission they're assigned.
Can you elaborate as to what they can do and cannot do as Marines on domestic soil?
So I can, sir. They are underneath, they're supporting NORTHCOM. Their mission, as directed by the SecDef, directed NORTHCOM to assume command in order to protect federal property and federal personnel. That is their mission, sir, protect federal property and federal personnel.
And in doing so, for example, can they fire warning shots?
No, sir, we do not fire warning shots.
Thank you. Secretary Phelan, if Congress gave the Marine Corps, let's say, a check for $134 million, what would you spend this on? And could that be used to increase the quality of life for our Marines or help deliver capabilities to the warfighter?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. We can use all the funds that you can give us.
So you could use the funds to do so many important things.
As I said, we have a mission, and our mission is to be prepared to fight and do as the President and Secretary of Defense order us to do, and that is what we're doing. And so, yeah, we need capital in order to support our programs. Yes.
General Smith, same question to you. What could you do with $134 million as in order of your priorities?
Well, I would spend it on training and on barracks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. Kiggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to our panelists for being here. I have the privilege of representing a big Navy district down in Hampton Roads, Virginia, and wanted to thank you all for continuing to prioritize the quality of life, quality of service measures that we spent so much time on last Congress. That continues to be a priority of mine as well. So many of my colleagues have talked about shipbuilding and ship repair during this session, and technology integration, use of unmanned and drones. So thank you for keeping that also on the top of your list of things to do. I wanted to take a few minutes, though, and talk about the importance of the East Coast Navy. And we see, when we turn on the news, and we, for example, are watching our F-18s drop bombs on the Houthis in Yemen, or there's something that arises in the world, and we frequently send our aircraft carriers and our battle groups and our air wings from the East Coast. And I know we recently welcomed home the Truman and before that the Eisenhower battle groups, and a lot of activity between what's happening in the Baltic Sea with the Russians and their submarines to what's continuing to happen in the Middle East and the Red Sea and Israel. So we can't understate the importance of the East Coast. And I represent the East Coast Master Jet Base, which is woefully underappreciated, woefully not taken care of. So I just wanted to hear from you all, because you all are all the leadership of our naval services. Admiral Kilby, can you please tell me what you think is the importance of the East Coast Navy in projecting American strength and deterrence?
Rep. Kiggins, thanks for that question. Quick soundbite on Truman. You know, she defended herself or other ships or another country 160 times on her deployment. She conducted 670 strikes from the air or from the sea into Yemen, and she conducted the biggest strike in the history of the world from a single aircraft carrier into Somalia. 8 named operations, 3 different combatant commanders, so I double down on what your statement is and concur. And Master Jet Base Oceana is a big portion of that, in addition to all the infrastructure at Hampton Roads, which is really all services, but primarily Navy, between the Navy base and Oceana.
Our aircraft carriers, just to echo that, continue to be tip of the spear. We can get America's might there in a matter of days. There's nothing that can replace that. And do you think that the East Coast Master Jet Base then needs F-35s and needs our next generation of strike fighters?
I think it needs to keep up with the Navy just like the West Coast in all respects, and I think it needs to be maintained. So there's a infrastructure thing that the Secretary and I are after, to include hangars and all runways and piers and all those things. And I, when I was the Deputy Commander of Fleet Forces, I went to Master Jet Base Oceana and concur wholeheartedly with what you're saying.
So can I get your commitment in the strategic laydown planning that will be happening very soon, that will be prioritized, our East Coast Master Jet Base? I know the Marines are being taken care of. They have, I believe, 4 F-35 squadrons. The Navy has 0 right now. We have 0 commitment from the Navy saying that they will get F-35s and will get next generation strike fighters, and it's becoming extremely frustrating.
I commit to you to look at that and continue to work for that end state, ma'am.
And then I also wanted to echo what my colleague had previously said, to open the news the other day and see that the Navy, we had $500 million that was being taken away from us from the Department of Defense to be committed to F-47s that the Air Force had, when Congress and Armed Services Committee had specifically allocated that money for next generation strike fighters. We need that money for a lot of reasons. China is already testing and flying J-50s and J-36 fighters, which is their 6th generation fighter. The Navy, to be competitive with that, has got to make that investment. I know the Air Force has got a lot of needs as well, but Secretary Phelan, can you please one more time address what you are doing to push back on that Department of Defense statement that they made that said they weren't going to take away the Congress appropriated money and give it to the Air Force?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. Look, as I said, we continue to look at the air wing of the future and the capabilities of 6th Gen and what that means. It's part of the whole force posture we're looking at between manned and unmanned and those different platforms and what makes the most sense. So I look forward to working with you as we develop those plans.
And we cannot do the missions that we just previously talked about that the Truman has just accomplished in the Red Sea without that next generation strike fighter money allocated. So please prioritize that. On top of that, and in closing, just wanted to put in my 2 cents about naval aviation training. We need T-45 replacements. That needs to be added to the top of the priority list. We cannot take between 3 and 4 years to train naval aviators and Marine Corps aviators. It's taking too long, and we need that Navy commitment. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Maryland, Ms. Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I want to build on some of the questions my colleagues started regarding preparing for the future of warfare. Representing Maryland, I recently visited Naval Air Station Pax River and saw some really impressive and critical work being done there, including the anechoic chamber, which is essential for training for warfare of the future. And it's in such high demand that even when it runs 24 hours a day, there's still a 5 to 6 year backlog on that training. So Admiral, can you speak to the Navy's priority list in terms of getting a second such chamber?
I cannot, but I will take that question for the record and come back to you, ma'am.
Okay, do you agree it's essential for warfighting?
I do, but I just don't have the specifics. I'll get them to you.
Understood, thank you. I'd like to move on to energy, and Mr. Secretary, I was really glad to hear that readiness is your priority. Last week, this committee was informed that energy resilience is military readiness, and representing the United States Naval Academy, I would suggest that your installations between the Marine Corps and the Navy are perhaps most ill-positioned to bear the impacts of sea level rise and hurricanes and extreme weather. So can you speak to, you've made some great progress, particularly in microgrid programs at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, anybody, for anybody here, how are Navy and Marine Corps applying the lessons from that base on microgrids, but also thinking about SMRs, which is a particular priority for this committee to address our energy vulnerabilities for anybody?
Well, ma'am, I'll take it off. The microgrids are operationally viable to us. We use them here in the continental United States, for example, as you know, at Miramar, but they're operationally deployable. Our goal is to be able to produce our own energy when forward deployed to need less, to be able to operate in a contested environment while producing our own energy, using solar panels, et cetera, to be able to power radios, because sometimes just the radio having a battery is enough to get the job done. So we're committed to continuing to do that for tactical